He spat a glob of blood toward the enemy below. Then, in full view of the stunned Solan army, he grabbed the severed head of a Solan soldier from the wall and hurled it toward Ulf's position. The head landed in the mud, its lifeless eyes staring blankly at the sky. The second wave of Solan soldiers screamed and surged toward the blood-soaked ramp once more. Tal Castle's low walls became a vortex of slaughter, filled with the clash of steel and deafening screams. Surprisingly, the defenders' cries of "kill" grew louder amidst the carnage, their morale surging rather than breaking. The battle turned white-hot, thick with the stench of blood. Neither the attacking Solan soldiers nor the onlookers expected this ragtag garrison, led by the madman Heberson, to resist with such ferocious tenacity. Every Solan, from veteran to servant, was transfixed by the brutal siege, calculating their potential spoils once the walls fell. Thomas, however, was distracted. His eyes darted like a rat's, locking onto a donkey cart piled with loot. Its owner turned away to watch the siege. Heart racing, Thomas slipped behind the cart, shielded from view, and snatched a heavy burlap sack from the edge. He exhaled, his back drenched in cold sweat, as if he had just survived a death-defying mission. In the Solan army, theft from comrades was a grave crime for naturalized soldiers like him, punishable by flogging or, more likely, public execution. Yet, Thomas couldn't stop. He thought of his starving, pregnant wife in their drafty tent beyond the pass, and the child who might never know a drop of milk. Every stolen coin or trinket was a chance to trade for rye or furs, a sliver of hope for his family's survival. This crushing guilt and devotion forced him to act as a thief during the gaps in warfare. Amidst the roar of battle, Thomas noticed Ulf's wolf-head banner signaling frantically. Instead of reinforcing the siege, the signals directed Solan reserves and guards toward the rear of the column. Soldiers began driving slaves and captives up the steep mountain slopes with spear butts and blades. Wagons were overturned and corpses piled up to form a chaotic, makeshift barricade in the road. Thomas's heart sank. This wasn't Ulf's style. Einar returned from the front, his face deathly pale. "What's happening? Why is the army retreating?" Thomas whispered. Einar replied anxiously. "Plantagenet forces are chasing us. Scouts say they're fast. Ulf ordered us to break Tal Castle immediately. If we're trapped in this valley, we're finished." Thomas tried to mask his dread with bravado. "This valley is narrow. 10 of our elites can hold off thousands. Let them come." Einar interrupted, his voice trembling. "It's Conford. They're flying the blue spruce flag." The name Conford hit Thomas like a branding iron, making his hair stand on end. Memories of the bloodbath at Conford and the relentless, death-dealing roar of their cannons flooded his mind, leaving him breathless. "Quiet," Einar hissed, glancing around. "Ulf has forbidden the news to prevent panic. The front is safer than the back now. Grab your weapon. We have to break the gate to survive." As if to confirm their doom, a sound shattered the air. Boom! A deep, thunderous cannon blast echoed from the valley entrance, reverberating off the cliffs like the drums of death. The entire army, attackers, guards, and laborers, froze, staring toward the smoke-filled southern entrance. Cold sweat beaded on Thomas's forehead, rolling down his grime-streaked face. Boom! A second blast followed, closer and more terrifying. Panic erupted. Slaves and captives began to scream, scrambling up the slopes as order collapsed. "Hold your ground. Death to any who retreat." The Solan execution squads charged into the crowd, butchering those attempting to flee to maintain a semblance of order. Thomas forced himself to stay calm, watching the chaos as officers roared and the execution squads swung their blades. Amidst the confusion, Thomas spotted a necklace in the debris of an overturned cart. Pretending to tie his leggings, he snatched the cold, hard object. He expertly tucked it into his tunic with his other stolen goods. "Kill! Kill the savages!" On the walls of Tal Castle, the defenders' roars grew increasingly frantic and desperate. The ramparts were a slaughterhouse, piled high with the bodies of defenders and Solan elites alike. Blood dripped from the stone walls, staining them a dark, glistening black in the summer sun. The defenders, fueled by the sight of invincible northern savages falling to their deaths, fought with a newfound, eerie fervor. Fear had been replaced by a primal, instinctive will to survive. Led by the madman Heberson, the ragtag garrison held the narrow breach with their lives. Yet, for veterans like Thomas and Einar, the cold dread only deepened. The thunderous, rhythmic cannon fire from the south grew louder, each blast striking their hearts like a hammer. "Conford, they're too fast," Einar stammered, his face ashen. The rapid, consistent fire suggested mobile field artillery, likely the dreaded quick-firing falconets. Trapped in the narrow Tal Valley, the army, supplies, and captives were nothing more than targets for a one-sided massacre. Boom! The blast was deafening, shaking the very earth beneath their feet. Thomas shuddered violently, losing control of his bladder as pure terror took hold. He gripped his sword, knuckles white, staring back toward the rising smoke. The order for a full-scale assault on the gate was finally given. Thomas, fearing the Carnford army's artillery behind them, chose to charge into the castle, hoping to survive the ensuing urban warfare. I roared and joined the desperate surge of men rushing toward the blood-soaked breach in the gate. Miles away, the entrance to Tal Valley was equally chaotic. A sea of blue-clad Solon soldiers flooded toward the northern gunfire. Roland urged the Carnford dragoons and infantry forward at maximum speed. However, the path was severely obstructed. Ulf had abandoned and destroyed carts, crates, and livestock to block the narrow valley road. Worse, Ulf's rearguard used these obstacles as cover, firing precise, deadly arrows at the advancing Carnford troops. Carnford musketeers were forced to halt and engage in a firefight with the Solon archers. The roar of flintlock muskets and the hiss of arrows filled the air, while thick smoke obscured the narrow canyon. The light falconets, intended to clear the path, were stalled by the debris. Roland rode to the front, livid, and demanded to know why William, commander of the 1st Battalion, had stopped. Time was critical. Any delay risked the fall of Tal Castle or the escape of Ulf's main force. William explained that the road was blocked and the artillery couldn't advance, forcing them to clear the Solon archers to avoid heavy casualties. Furious, Roland gave William 10 minutes to break through the bend, threatening him with military law if he failed. He ordered the military judge to start the countdown immediately. The judge flipped a small hourglass, marking the start of the 10-minute deadline. William cursed, knowing there was no turning back. He drew his sword and roared for the battalion to fix bayonets and charge. A shrill bugle call pierced the air. The 1st Battalion surged forward, braving the rain of arrows. Arrows whistled through the air. Dozens of soldiers fell instantly, their blood staining the rocks. Peter, terrified but knowing retreat meant execution, pressed on. He vaulted over an overturned cart, narrowly dodging a heavy arrow that struck a comrade behind him. He sprang up, leveling his bayonet musket. He encountered a Solon archer fumbling for his sword. Peter lunged, driving his bayonet deep into the archer's abdomen. The archer shrieked, clutching the musket barrel to prevent Peter from withdrawing the blade. Peter kicked the man away, ripping the bayonet free in a spray of blood. Another Solon soldier charged at him with a scimitar. With muscle memory, Peter fired his still-smoking musket at point-blank range. The blast struck the soldier, who collapsed in disbelief. Peter shouted for his comrades to advance while he frantically reloaded behind a wreck. Despite his adrenaline-fueled shaking, he reloaded in seconds. Led by Peter and other officers, the 1st Battalion engaged in brutal close-quarters combat. The sound of musketry intensified in the narrow pass. Outnumbered and lacking formation, the Solon rearguard began to crumble under the bayonet charge. Inside Tal Castle, Solon officers screamed for their men to push forward. Thomas and Einar fought their way through the gate into the castle. The sound of approaching Carnford forces filled the Solon soldiers with panic. They had expected an easy victory, but Heberson had retreated into the inner keep, using the labyrinthine streets and buildings to mount a desperate defense. Urban warfare proved to be a chaotic and terrifying ordeal. Danger lurked behind every corner, door, and window. The Solon advantage in numbers was neutralized by the complex terrain. Heberson's voice echoed through the castle, laughing as if the slaughter were a game. To Thomas, the laughter was a death knell, heightening his fear of being trapped by the approaching Carnford army. After bloody fighting, Thomas reached the entrance to the Lord's Hall. Seeing a group of Solon soldiers surrounding a center point, Thomas prepared to charge in. Einar grabbed his arm, pulling him back to look at the center of the circle. There stood Heberson and 4 others, backed against a pile of oil-soaked firewood. Heberson stood amidst the carnage, his armor pierced by broken arrows, his hair matted with blood. Covered in gore, he was a living statue of death, blood dripping from his hair onto the stone floor. Weaponless, he gripped a burning torch, his scarred face twisted into a mocking, serene smile. Surveying the encroaching Solon soldiers, Heberson laughed hoarsely. The Carnford army is coming. You savages are finished. I'll be waiting for you in hell. Thomas, fueled by rage and terror, lunged forward. You lunatic. Why stay? Your king and queen won't reward you, nor remember your name. Why throw away your life and this city for nothing? Heberson met the desperate outburst with a look of condescending pity. A slave like you, obsessed only with survival and silver, could never understand, he replied, his voice heavy. Some things in this world are worth more than life itself. He straightened his back, shouting with his final strength, I've killed 10 of your elites and died with my brothers. It was worth it. His 4 comrades echoed his laughter, fearless and defiant. Their collective roar of laughter echoed through the bloody castle, transcending death. Heberson hurled his torch into a pile of oil-soaked firewood. Boom! Flames erupted, consuming the 5 men and illuminating the terrified faces of the surrounding Solon soldiers. Thomas stood frozen, his sword clattering to the ground. He stared, transfixed, as the fire engulfed the 5 figures who remained standing even as they burned. The heat was intense, yet Thomas felt a bone-chilling cold. Thomas, get the horses. Einar's roar snapped him out of his trance. The Lord's Hall burned, casting flickering shadows over the panicked Solonians. Yes, Thomas stammered. Survival instinct overriding his shock, he bolted toward the stables. The castle was in chaos. Soldiers were looting or fleeing, sensing their impending doom. As he exited the courtyard, a deafening roar erupted from the gate, not of battle, but of a total rout. The sharp, rhythmic cracks of flintlock muskets echoed, followed by screams of the dying. The Carnford army had breached the gates. Thomas froze as a tide of terrified soldiers flooded back into the castle, trampling one another. Attempts to restore order failed as the retreat turned into a stampede. Boom! A cannon blast shook the earth, deafening Thomas. The gatehouse crumbled under the bombardment, raining debris and blood upon the fleeing crowd. Escape through the gate was suicide. The Carnford guns were waiting. Einar, to the north gate. Thomas screamed, abandoning the main exit to sprint toward the quieter side of the castle. Discipline dissolved. Every surviving soldier, elite or servant, followed the same desperate path. Abandoning loot and duty, they surged toward the north gate like a filthy, panicked river. They knew the Sparrow Legion was finished. Tal Castle was now a death trap. Thomas's lungs burned, his throat tasting of blood. He and Einar scrambled out the north gate into a narrow path leading into the valley, hoping to escape the gunfire. The hope lasted less than 100 paces. Back! Go back! They're in front too. The vanguard slammed to a halt, screaming as they turned back toward the castle, trapped by the chaos. Thomas and Einar stopped, peering ahead in dread. Emerging from the path's bend were blue-clad cavalry, firing short-barreled lances with lethal precision. The rear of the fleeing mob fell like wheat before a scythe. Dragoons, the signature force of Carnford. Their presence meant they were being flanked, likely by me. Trapped between 2 Carnford forces in Tal Valley, Thomas and Einar shared a look of absolute despair. With no escape and impassable cliffs on either side, they were doomed. Back, into the castle? Thomas whispered, clinging to a sliver of false hope. It's death either way, Einar replied grimly. Swept up by the tide of terrified men, they were pushed back toward the north gate they had just fled. The last flicker of hope was extinguished. Outside the south gate, the valley had become a slaughterhouse. Freed slaves and captives scattered like sheep, fleeing into the hills. Organized Solon resistance had collapsed, leaving only isolated pockets of doomed men. Carnford musketeers advanced in cold, rhythmic lines, marching over the wreckage of the Solon army. The Carnford army did not rush to scatter. Instead, they advanced like a wall of death, methodically eliminating the remaining Solon soldiers with precise, rhythmic volleys. As white smoke rose and muskets fired, Solonians fell across the road in droves. Agile squads climbed the slopes to hunt down fleeing Solon soldiers, denying them any chance to regroup or hide. Near the south gate of Talberg, Ulf and his last 20 or 30 elite Solon soldiers made a desperate stand behind a pile of rocks. These veterans used bows and a few matchlock muskets, sheltering behind rocks and wreckage to trade fire with the closing Conford musketeers. The Solon elites, especially the veteran hunters, utilized the rugged mountain terrain to maximize their marksmanship. Their heavy arrows took a toll on the advancing Conford soldiers, briefly gaining an edge in close-quarters combat. Yet, this resistance was ultimately futile. Like a reef being eroded by a storm, they were surrounded by the blue-clad Conford army, whose tightening circle of musket fire left no escape. Ulf, protected by his guards, stood with a look of profound, hollow numbness. He clutched his blade, staring blankly at the encroaching blue army and the fluttering blue spruce flag that haunted his nightmares. The Conford army appeared like divine soldiers, turning his brilliant victories into crushing defeats in an instant. "My lord, let us escort you out through the side slope. There is still a chance," a bloodied guard captain pleaded, weeping. The other guards looked on with the same desperate hope. Ulf looked down at his loyal men, then scanned the warriors who had followed him into death. Suddenly, he let out a hoarse, strange laugh of liberation. The captain, thinking Ulf had lost his mind, moved to force him away, but Ulf shoved him aside with surprising strength. Ulf stood up, his numbness replaced by a mix of madness, defiance, and pride. "Run? Where to?" Ulf roared over the gunfire. "Solon is doomed. Conford is like a pack of wolves. There is no escaping them." He added with grim calm, "Harold will die too. I'll go first and show him how a Solon man dies, without shaming our ancestors." "My lord," the guards shouted, their fighting spirit reignited by his final display of courage. "Solon warriors, follow me, charge!" Ulf roared, leaping onto a boulder to expose himself to the Conford muskets. As he jumped, a volley rang out. Bang, bang, bang. Over a dozen Conford musketeers fired simultaneously, their lead pellets engulfing Ulf's frame. Puff, puff, puff. Ulf stiffened, his sword held high. He looked down at his bleeding chest, his expression freezing before he collapsed lifelessly beneath the boulder. Blood pooled around him, staining the earth red. The fierce Solon commander who had plagued the Plantagenets was dead. His guards charged in a final, suicidal rage, only to be cut down by concentrated volleys and bayonets. With Ulf's death, organized resistance in Tal Valley vanished. Soon, the blue flag of Conford rose over Talberg. With their leader gone, the remaining Solon soldiers attempted a futile last stand within the city streets. Faced with the overwhelming force and firepower of the Conford army, their resistance evaporated like dew. Lacking command, the remnants were easily broken and cleared out by Conford squads. Despair spread. Soldiers either surrendered or were cut down while fleeing. The sounds of battle faded, replaced by the shouts of victors and the cries of the defeated. In the smoke-filled Lord's Hall, the smell of charred flesh lingered. I stood silently with my officers, watching 5 charred, unrecognizable bodies huddled together in the embers. "Who was the Lord of Talberg?" I asked quietly. An aide checked the registry and replied, "My lord, it was Heberson. He was known for being greedy and rough, but quite brave." I nodded, acknowledging that if they hadn't held the line, Ulf might have escaped with his plunder. They were true warriors, regardless of their past. "Bury them with honors near Talberg, facing south," I commanded. "Yes, my lord." An officer ordered the bodies to be carefully removed. Roland entered, excited. "My lord, it's confirmed. Ulf is dead. His body is outside." Soldiers brought in a body covered by a Solon flag and laid it on the ground. They revealed the pale, grim face of Ulf, his chest riddled with bullet holes. I approached my old rival, Ulf. Despite years of conflict, this was my first time seeing the man in person and in such a state. "It's him," I confirmed. I ordered Roland to preserve the body and pack it with Ulf's sword and banner, then send a reliable escort to the royal capital, Place. Have Richter's Intelligence Bureau broadcast this victory across the kingdom, I commanded. Highlight our relief of Talberg, the total annihilation of the Sparrow Legion, and the rescue of thousands. I want the Queen to see who is truly bleeding for this kingdom while she plays politics. Stepping out of the blood-stained hall into the courtyard, I took a deep breath, purging my frustration. Better to break a finger than wound the hand, I told my officers. We've destroyed their strongest core unit. With the Sparrow Legion and Ulf gone, I want to see how many fingers Harold is left to strike with. Roland questioned. Lord, Ulf was often at odds with Harold. Didn't we just remove a rival for him? I smiled. Perhaps, but Ulf was a symbol of Solon's martial power. Before, we only killed mid-level officers. Now, a Legion commander and his entire force have been wiped out. How will the other commanders react when they hear this in Flossgard? They will realize that the Carnford army can reach even the highest nobles. Neither Harold nor their god of war can protect them. Fear is more effective than casualties. This will shatter their morale and internal cohesion, making it much harder for Harold to regroup. The officers nodded in agreement. Rest at Tal Castle for 2 days to treat the wounded and reorganize. Send scouts to monitor Harold's main force. I turned to Roland. After 2 days, I returned to Carnford to prepare for the autumn offensive. You will lead your legion back to the field territory. Roland looked disappointed. I'm not joining the final assault on Flossgard. I gripped Roland's arm. Your mission is more critical. Destroying Harold is only the first step. Once Harold falls, we confront the royal capital. That is when we march south. Your legion in the field territory is our spearhead. The deeper your roots, the faster we can strike place. I've reserved the honor of planting our flag on the capital's walls for you. Roland's eyes ignited with ambition. Understood, Lord. I will turn the field territory into an impenetrable springboard. I will be the first to breach place. Before Harold received the official report, a more visceral message reached him. His scouts returned, not with documents, but with a horrifying sight. Ulf's severed head was mounted on a pike above the south gate of Tal Castle. It swayed in the wind, staring north, framed by the fluttering blue spruce flag. The Sparrow Legion, they're gone. Lord Ulf is dead, the scout cried. The camp erupted. Ulf was a pillar of Solon's military might. To have him beheaded and displayed was a humiliation and a direct challenge to every Solon warrior. March on Tal Castle. Retrieve his body. We must avenge him, the nobles shouted. The camp was in an uproar, with generals demanding an immediate counterattack. Harold sat on his throne, his face obscured by flickering lamplight. He remained cold and calculating. Revenge? It was clearly a trap. I wanted them to attack a fortified position held by an army that had just won a decisive victory. Charging into the narrow Tal Valley again would be suicide, exactly what I desired. Yet, the trap was diabolical because it targeted their traditions. Solon valued honor above all. Ignoring the desecration of a commander's body would destroy Harold's prestige and the soldiers' morale. As the shouting peaked, Leon stood up. Quiet. Listen to me. The camp fell silent, respecting Leon's reputation for wisdom. We are loyal, but are we sure that is Lord Ulf's head? We only have the word of terrified scouts. It is likely a trick. Karl is a deceitful villain. He probably used a slave's head to lure us into a trap. If we fall for it, we sacrifice more warriors for nothing. Leon's words acted like cold water on a furnace. The fervor for revenge stalled, replaced by doubt. The fear of the Carnford name and their cannons made the soldiers hesitate. Even the loudest agitators took the out Leon provided. They wanted to appear loyal, but they were terrified of facing the Carnford army again. Leon is right. We must be cautious. We need to reconsider. The calls for war died down, and the immediate crisis was averted. Harold nodded at Leon. Order the army to retreat to Flossgard. We will verify the truth before acting. As the army withdrew, the atmosphere was heavy. They had gained some loot, but the loss of Ulf and the Sparrow Legion felt like a limb had been severed, a permanent, humiliating wound. The blood spilled was a heavy price, and the loss of the finger felt like a net deficit. During a rest, Sven approached his silent brother, Harold, attempting to console the troubled monarch. Brother, perhaps Ulf's death isn't entirely bad, Sven suggested. At Carnford, his unauthorized retreat with the Sparrow Legion threw our lines into chaos. He was insubordinate. His death removes a hidden threat. Harold didn't answer immediately. He pulled a flat paper box from his pouch, revealing several white, cigarette-like rolls. These cigarettes had become popular among Solon's elite and soldiers, often smuggled from comfort-controlled zones by Legion commanders seeking stress relief. They were essentially funding Conford to build the very weapons used against them. Harold, increasingly dependent, lit one. Sven struck a match, shielding it for his brother. Harold inhaled deeply, exhaling smoke into the northern frontier wind. Sven, if it were just Ulf, I wouldn't be this troubled. He took another drag, his eyes darkening. The entire Sparrow Legion was annihilated. 2,000 elite, armored horse archers, gone. These weren't conscripts. They were Ulf's core veterans. Harold looked at his weary troops. The real trouble is the other Legion commanders. If I can kill Ulf, I can kill any of them. That fear, that their own heads might be next, will make them hesitate. Will they ever fight for us with the same fervor again? I doubt it. Harold stared toward Conford, the future of Solon looking increasingly bleak through the haze of his cigarette. Sven had no words of comfort. The destruction of the Sparrow Legion was too shocking. Seeing a warrior like Ulf meet such an end left Sven feeling a chilling, profound dread for Solon's future. Since I arrived in the northern frontier, Solon had known no peace. Defeats mounted, blood was spilled, and now a Legion commander had been beheaded. Sven feared Solon was truly reaching its end. He watched his brother's lonely, desolate silhouette in the twilight. After crushing the Sparrow Legion at Tal Castle, I remained vigilant, wary of the Queen Mother's potential schemes. I knew the journey back to Conford was the most vulnerable time for my army. Queen Katerina would surely attempt to strike. I adopted a conservative, Roman-style marching formation, prioritizing security over speed. The army marched in strict formation with scouts and cavalry screening the flanks. By noon, once a safe location was identified, they halted. The afternoon was spent building a fortified camp, utilizing shovels and axes to dig trenches and erect defenses. A standard camp with trenches, walls, and watchtowers was completed by sunset, housing all troops, supplies, and prisoners. Each morning, they dismantled the camp, packed their materials, and repeated the process after a half-day's march. This slow, methodical pace ensured the army was always protected by fortifications, minimizing the risk of night raids and keeping the soldiers fresh for potential combat. As I suspected, Queen Katerina had ordered Count Eisenberg to lead an elite force to ambush me in the mountain passes. However, Count Eisenberg found no opportunity. My army never overextended and vanished into their impenetrable, fortified camps every afternoon. Night raids were impossible against the trenches, and daytime ambushes were thwarted by my dense scout network. After days of futile stalking, Eisenberg realized my turtle-like, but ironclad march left no openings. Fearing a counterattack as they neared Conford, Eisenberg abandoned the ambush and returned to the royal capital. My caution allowed me to return safely to Conford. Conford was a hive of activity, transformed into a massive military base in preparation for the autumn offensive. Supply lines of grain and weapons flowed into the city, while ships arrived at the port with reinforcements. Count Rockefort arrived with 30,000 elite troops from France City. Their arrival bolstered the alliance, with the Count signaling his total commitment to me. Duke Schmidt followed, landing 20,000 private soldiers and conscripts at Amber Bay. The Duke's banners marked the first major assembly of the Confort-Schmidt-Rochefort alliance. With my own 20,000 troops and support staff, the total force gathered near Conford neared 100,000. This was not a rabble, but a peak-condition force of the three powers' best soldiers. With banners blotting out the sun and the constant sound of training, the message was clear. The final confrontation was at hand. The final battle against the Solon kingdom approaches. Harold and his people face their most severe, perhaps final, test in a century. I returned to Carnford Castle to find a rare, warm gathering of my family amidst the looming war. In the living room, Lady Irene sat on the rug, playing with toddler Klein, who giggled at his grandmother. Duke Schmidt, usually stern, watched his grandson with a rare, gentle smile. Though he had many grandchildren, Klein held a special place in his heart. Klein represented the future of the Schmidt family and the vital alliance between me and Charlotte, daughter of Count Rochefort. Nearby, Count Rochefort and Lady Isabel sat with their son, Henry, and Princess Louise. The Count comforted Henry regarding his recent imprisonment, while Lady Isabel chatted warmly with Princess Louise, clearly pleased with her future daughter-in-law. Charlotte greeted me immediately, helping me with my coat and checking my well-being. "You're back. Any trouble on the road?" I held her hand, finding peace in her presence. I joked, "Everything is fine. The Queen Mother sent a gift, but I was too slow to open it. Otherwise, all is well." Charlotte understood the danger, but simply squeezed my hand, whispering, "I'm just glad you're safe." That evening, the castle hosted a warm family banquet. The table was filled with northern delicacies and wine, illuminating faces with relief and joy. Outside the stone walls, war loomed, but inside, the Duke and the Count set aside politics to bond like ordinary kin. Henry and Princess Louise, though marked by their ordeal, looked visibly happy. Charlotte doted on Klein and me, the banquet lasting late into the night. Once the family retired, I, the Duke, and the Count retreated to my study, dominated by a map of the northern frontier. The heavy oak door closed, leaving them with only a small peat stove and comfortable chairs. The dim light was perfect for their secret council. History is often shaped not in formal halls, but in private conversations between key leaders. I poured drinks and opened the discussion. Between our three factions, we have 70,000 troops gathered at Carnford. Harold, meanwhile. I pointed to Flossgard. With the Sparrow Legion destroyed at Tal Castle, Harold has fewer than 20,000 mobile troops. Even with forced conscription, he won't exceed 50,000, mostly untrained slaves. I surveyed the elders. We have the advantage in numbers, technology, logistics, and morale. The Solonians are broken and fearful. We need no tricks, I concluded. We will crush them with overwhelming force from multiple directions. I proposed an enhanced version of the spring offensive. The West, Werner and Valaya's allied forces will harass and distract the enemy. The East, Count Rochefort, you will lead the Franz City elite to seize Twin Rivers City and threaten Flossgard's flank. The South, my father and I will lead the main force from the Golden City, marching north to strike Flossgard directly and end this century-long threat. I waited for their judgment. Duke Schmidt nodded, agreed. No need for risks. We simply crush them. Count Rochefort tapped his chair. A sound analysis. Three-pronged pressure will prevent Harold from concentrating his forces. It is the surest path to victory. With their approval, I felt my burden lift. They spent the rest of the night finalizing logistics, communications, and timelines. The next day, I stood before 4,000 soldiers under the spruce banner to issue my manifesto. A public declaration to the people of the northern frontier and the Solon tribes. In the name of God and the Crown, I, Karl von Schmidt, Lord of Carnford and commander of the Allied forces, declare, kings are ordained by heaven to maintain order and protect the innocent. The Plantagenet kings once granted the Solonians land and status to serve as a shield for our borders. Yet, Harold has proven himself a wolf, betraying the grace of his lords. He usurped the throne, stole northern lands, and repeatedly trampled upon the peace we provided. My manifesto denounces the enemy for betraying oaths, shattering a century of loyalty. It accuses them of slaughtering innocents, burning cities, and turning fertile lands into blood-soaked ruins. It condemns their destruction of civilization, enslavement of free people, and repeated treachery, which has left the northern frontier in constant turmoil. I, heir to the northern defenders, uphold the duty of my ancestors. Since taking command, I have labored tirelessly, day and night. This is not for fame, but out of agony for the suffering masses, the orphans, the widows, and the children sold into slavery. Today, alongside Count Rochefort, Duke Schmidt's forces, and allies like Werner and Valaya, I march to war. Our 100,000-strong army fights not for bloodlust, but to end this conflict and protect life. Our first goal, raise Flossgard and tear down the rebel banners. Second, liberate the captives, returning children to their mothers and peace to the elderly. Third, restore order, ensuring church bells ring and wheat grows again in the desolate fields. I call upon all Solonians. Those with conscience who capture the rebel leaders will be rewarded. Those coerced into rebellion who lay down their arms will be pardoned. Those who resist will be crushed by our cannons. Let the heavens and the earth witness this pledge. This decree takes effect throughout the northern frontier immediately. Signed, I, Lord of Conford and Commander-in-Chief of the Rochefort-Schmidt Coalition. In the royal capital of Plantagenet, Queen Mother Catherine's private chamber. Enough, Catherine snapped, her voice sharp as she interrupted the chamberlain. It's all Karl, Rochefort, and Schmidt. How arrogant. She slammed the parchment onto a table, rattling a delicate porcelain cup. Turning to Victor, who lurked in the shadows, she fumed. What is he playing at? Does he think he's a savior? Victor stepped forward, his face obscured by his hood, his eyes cold and serpentine. Your Majesty, the manifesto ignores the crown entirely, focusing only on the righteous deeds of the three houses. His ambition is clear. He is seizing the moral high ground of reclaiming the North to claim the glory for himself. It is a classic political maneuver, he added with a sneer. But this isn't for the wise. It's for the commoners who crave a hero. To them, whoever defeats the Solonians is the true champion. Karl knows this. He paints himself as a savior, and it is working. The taverns are already singing his praises. That damned usurper. Catherine hissed, her nails digging into her furs. Victor's analysis chilled her. She realized she was losing control over the narrative of legitimacy. However, Victor continued, his voice dropping. The manifesto is not our greatest threat. Catherine looked up. Karl marched north with a massive force, yet he left a crack unit under Roland in the field territory. Why keep a mobile force in the south while the main battle looms? Catherine turned pale, the realization hitting her like ice. That army wasn't for the Solonians. It was to keep watch over the royal capital and her. Once the Northern War concludes, that force will be the vanguard of his march south, a sword of Damocles hanging over her head. He really intends to, she whispered, trembling at his strategic depth. The manifesto is just a smokescreen, Victor said. The real game is in the south. We must act before time runs out. Catherine steeled herself, her political instincts overriding her fear. You are right. We cannot hesitate. What of Count Eisenberg? I am accelerating the plan, Victor bowed. We must have an army loyal only to you before Karl turns his gaze toward us. In Flossgard. Ridiculous. Absurd. Utterly shameless. Harold roared, rising from his bearskin throne and hurling the manifesto onto the stone floor. The parchment fluttered uselessly to the ground. The accusations of him being a wolf and a desecrator mocked him from the page. His commanders and tribal leaders stood silent, terrified to provoke the great chieftain's rage. Since June, bad news had arrived like a relentless blizzard. Conford's mobilization was no secret. The Plantagenets were preparing for a final, massive offensive. Harold had tried to suppress the rumors, but panic had already spread like a plague. This manifesto was the final insult, formally announcing their impending doom. In the silence, Asgir muttered, trying to mask his fear with arrogance. Humph, that Karl. He's dreaming. Our Solon warriors are invincible in the field. Sven stepped forward, saluting firmly. Brother, calm yourself. My challenge is merely a ploy to shake our morale. Let our Solon cavalry prove our superiority in open battle. We are united. We will make me regret this. Sven's words were a calculated attempt to bolster morale, as he knew Solon's situation was dire and any sign of weakness would be fatal. Harold took several deep breaths, forcing himself to remain calm. Realizing Sven was offering him a way out, Harold sat back, gripping the stone armrests. He looked at the fearful faces before him and declared with grim resolve, Sven is right. If he wants a battle, he shall have it. This decides our nation's fate. Every tribe and legion must set aside past grievances and fight as one. We are currently at a disadvantage in supplies and population, but victory over me will bring us everything: land, grain, slaves, and treasure. I promise. If we win, I will repay all losses tenfold. He turned his gaze to one man. Sigurd, the gaunt and shrewd logistics chief, stepped forward. I am here, Your Majesty. We cannot conjure soldiers, but we must have supplies, Harold commanded. You must levy and seize whatever is needed from the tribes. Scrape the earth if you must, but ensure our frontline soldiers do not fight on empty stomachs. Do you understand? Sigurd trembled, knowing this order meant cruel, desperate plundering of an already suffering populace, but he dared not refuse and bowed deeply. The atmosphere in the hall grew heavy. My father, Harold recalled, his voice distant, started with only dozens of riders, fighting through snow and wolves to build Solon's foundation. We have survived worse. I believe heaven still favors us. Let us settle this with me on our ancestral lands. By July, all of Solon was gripped by despair. Instead of a lush, productive summer, the land was filled with the scent of death. Wolf smoke signals no longer just warned of borders. They signaled internal crackdowns and forced conscription, accompanied by the wails of grieving families. The cries were for the last remaining sons being dragged away. Harold had issued the most ruthless, fanatical mobilization order in Solon's history. He had abandoned all mercy to secure victory in this decisive battle. Standards were dropped. Even boys as short as 1.45 meters, barely out of childhood, were ripped from their mother's arms and shoved into the ranks. The three-man conscription rule, or two-man, in disloyal regions, threatened to drain every household of its last labor and blood. Resistance was met with bloody suppression. Harold showed unprecedented coldness toward his own people. His conscription squads, backed by combat soldiers, whipped or executed anyone who resisted, confiscating property and enslaving the women. Violent clashes left villages burned and corpses strewn about, deepening the terror and hatred. Solon's foundation began to fracture under this desperate, self-destructive mobilization. Thomas and Einar, veterans who survived the Tal Valley hell, felt no relief in their survival. They were swept back to the assembly point near Flossgard. For Thomas, fate dealt a cruel blow. Before he could recover from the trauma of losing his comrades, he learned his pregnant wife had died in childbirth. She had been buried in a mass grave before he could even see her. Before he could grieve, the conscription order shackled him once more. He donned his blood-stained leather armor and picked up his notched saber, standing among terrified, weeping children like a hollow shell of a man. War had taken his friends, his unborn child, and his last shred of warmth. He was a living corpse, surrounded by trembling boys whose fear contrasted sharply with his own dead-eyed despair. On the plains outside Flossgard, a forest of weapons and banners attempted to project an image of a mighty, unified army. Harold, clad in black iron scale armor and a white wolfskin cloak, stood on a wooden platform surrounded by his generals. His gaze swept over the vast, dark ranks. Sigurd reported, "Your Majesty, the army is assembled. 20,000 armored soldiers, 22,000 militia, 10,000 matchlock musketeers, and 78,000 slaves and laborers for transport and support." The total of over 130,000 sounded impressive, but Harold knew the truth. Of the 20,000 armored soldiers, less than half were true, battle-hardened veterans after the losses at Conford and Tal Valley. Many were poorly trained or under-equipped militia. Harold doubted they could withstand the disciplined, gunpowder-armed elite of Conford and France City. "Any changes in my strategy?" Harold asked. Sven pointed to a map, 3 prongs, as in spring. "Count Rockefort leads 30,000 at Twin River City. We have reinforced it to hold the gate. In the west, at Sea City, Valaya and Werner have surrounded the city. We have sent no reinforcements. They must hold on their own." Harold nodded, approving the strategy of focusing on the decisive front. "The west is a distraction. The key is Twin River City. I have ordered Leon to hold at all costs and pin down Rockefort's main force until we win in the south." He looked toward the southern horizon, the site of the coming clash. "The south is where we decide our fate. I will lead the main force against me and Duke Schmidt. A victory there will allow us to crush Rockefort and relieve the west. This is a clear, Solon-style military plan. Interior lines, concentrated force, and defeating enemies one by one. It is concise, direct, and bets the nation's fate on the speed and outcome of a single decisive battle. Of course, this is the ideal scenario. Between ideal and reality lie Carnford's formidable firepower and discipline, contrasted against our own army, which appears vast but is fundamentally fragile. Where is Carl? Any specific movements? Harold demanded. Your Majesty, scouts report Carl's vanguard reached and captured the Golden City 3 days ago. Per our plan, we withdrew without resistance to lure them deep, stretch their supply lines, and force a battle on our chosen ground, Sven replied. Hearing Golden City, his former southern territory jewel, now a ruin, Harold sighed, looking at the gathering war clouds. The decisive battle is coming. Order the troops to proceed as planned. Let us depart. Inside the ruined Lord's Manor of the Golden City. Unlike the grim atmosphere in Flossgard, the Golden City, recently easily reclaimed by the Carnford army, buzzed with a calm, confident efficiency. Soldiers cleared streets and fortified defenses. I had ordered the city destroyed in spring. Now that I had retaken it, Harold had left me little more than an empty shell. A courier arriving by fast boat across Amber Bay broke the calm, delivering an urgent dispatch to me. Roland is fighting the Queen Mother's army in the field territory. I scanned the wax-sealed report. Brendan showed little surprise. The Queen Mother, she finally couldn't hold back. My expression shifted from serious to mocking. I handed the report to Brendan. She couldn't. My presence in the field territory has been a thorn in her side. But the result? It likely shocked her and Count Eisenberg. Brendan read the report. The field territory army attacked Roland's position, suffered over 300 casualties in half a day, and routed toward the royal capital. Roland's losses were minimal. Humph, Brendan scoffed. She couldn't even shake General Roland's 2,000 men. She should realize the reality of the situation now. Perhaps, I replied, though my eyes remained grave. I pulled another encrypted report from the Intelligence Bureau. But look at this. The Northern Frontier Forces, including Count Boris, received emergency mobilization orders. My brother Friedrich says the Queen Mother is trying to scrape together 10,000 troops from border garrisons and loyalist nobles. I added coldly, their destination is unclear, but they are likely coming for us, either to stab us in the back during the battle with Harold or to reinforce the capital. Brendan analyzed calmly. Given the kingdom's administrative rot, even if she is desperate, assembling 10,000 effective troops before next spring would be a miracle. Most are ghost soldiers or untrained nobles. If she gets 2,000 or 3,000 actual combatants, it would be a surprise. They are not a threat. I nodded in agreement. I looked toward the northern sky. You're right. The kingdom's machine is rusted. But since we moved north, her meddling has increased. We must remain vigilant. The decisive battle with Harold must be swift and clean. We cannot let it drag into winter or become a stalemate. Time is precious. We must finish the northern threat before the Queen Mother or others can consolidate power. Only then can we settle scores with our old friends in the south. Brendan nodded firmly. September 7th, afternoon, an unnamed wasteland 30 kilometers south of Flossgard. Late autumn winds whipped across the withered northern frontier under a leaden, iron-gray sky. Two massive armies, the steel currents deciding the North's fate, met on this forgotten land. Carnford's army, superior in mobility and organization, seized the favorable terrain on the southern flank, deploying its main cavalry first. Two well-trained heavy cavalry battalions anchored the center, flanked by dragoon battalions, a balanced, mobile fist. The heavy cavalry could deliver crushing charges, while the dragoons used their flintlock muskets to snipe Solon's pesky horse archers, securing the perimeter. The cavalry stood silent, save for the snapping of banners in the wind. 3 miles back, Carnford's main infantry flowed in like blue rivers. Officers marked camp positions and attack lines with colorful flags and lime. Pre-deployed scouts had set markers, allowing arriving battalions to fall into position with mechanical precision. They utilized my adapted Swedish linear formation, prioritizing a wider front and heavier firepower. Carnford engineers quickly converted a ruined village into a forward observation post. I ascended a makeshift watchtower built from ruins. Through my telescope, I scanned the horizon. Gray-yellow smoke columns rose behind distant hills, signs of the enemy's march and campfires. Has Solon's main force crossed the Twin Rivers? I asked without turning. Brendan arrived, reporting, scouts say Harold's Wolf and Tiger legions are crossing via pontoon bridges, with the Bear legion's 2,000 men in support on the north bank. They have about 15 3-pounder field bronze cannons and 9 older captured pieces. Roughly 12,000 Solon cavalry have crossed, led by the Horse Archery Legion. Where are they camping? I asked, rubbing my eyes. About 10 miles from our vanguard. They are setting up camp, but it looks hurried. I showed no surprise. Execute plan number 3. Order the battalion commanders. Their current camp location is their designated battle position for tomorrow. Follow the markers strictly. Camp layout, trench depth, and check hedgehogs must be perfect. Tell the night watch to monitor the weather. If it snows, wake me immediately. Understood, Brendan replied. By evening, the two armies stood in a tense, 10-mile standoff. Both sides chose to fortify their camps, recover strength, and scout rather than launch immediate attacks. A brutal, silent skirmish unfolded across the 10-mile front, with scouts and rangers hunting each other like hounds across the withered grasslands. Carnford's dragoons and cavalry repelled Solon scouts, while Solon light cavalry used their terrain knowledge to ambush isolated Carnford patrols. The vast battlefield prevented either side from sealing off the other's vision, keeping the scouts' skirmishes intense until nightfall. Harold stood beneath his royal banner, frowning at the silent, lethal blue camp 10 miles away. Unlike his past campaigns against the Plantagenet kingdom, he did not rush to attack while his opponent was settling in. The Solon army needed rest, and Harold, wary of me and Carnford, dared not be careless. Inside the Solon camp, soldiers were busy driving stakes and pitching tents, their exhaustion masked by tension. The frozen northern frontier soil made trenching difficult. Both sides relied on supply wagons, makeshift wooden fences, caltrops, and tripwires for defense. Carnford's 7 infantry battalions established a rigorous night defense, deploying sentries, traps, and hidden reserves to prevent night raids. As darkness fell, the skirmishing cavalry retreated to their respective campfires. Moonlight illuminated the battlefield, revealing the stark contrast of blue Carnford uniforms and dark Solon armor scattered among the frozen grass. Cold winds blew withered leaves over the faces of the fallen. Silence returned to the plains, masking the heavy breathing of over 100,000 men and the impending storm of death. The Solonians did not let the Carnford camp rest. Late at night, Solon scouts attempted to infiltrate the Carnford perimeter to kill sentries or gather intelligence. The Carnford defense proved superior. Tripwire-triggered landmines exploded, tearing through the night and killing the lead Solon soldiers. Hounds barked, and patrols immediately illuminated the area with torches. The raid failed instantly, leaving only corpses and blood, which only served to heighten Carnford's vigilance. This failure proved to the Solonians that their enemy was far more disciplined than the Plantagenet armies they had faced before. Intermittent snow covered the armor, tents, and the scars of yesterday's battle. The erratic weather became a critical variable. Both commanders checked the snow density throughout the night, concerned that deep snow would hinder large-scale maneuvers. As the snow intensified at dawn, both sides cautiously refrained from launching a full-scale assault. After sunrise, the snow eased, and Solon cavalry swarmed out to harass and scout the Carnford flanks. While tactically ineffective against Carnford's rigid defenses, these maneuvers boosted Solon morale and maintained their combat readiness. Carnford responded with disciplined cavalry charges, smashing into the scattered Solon riders. Dragoons utilized their mobility to form firing lines, using their flintlock muskets to suppress the Solon horse archers. The silence was shattered by the roar of muskets, the twang of bowstrings, and the screams of horses. Solon's archery failed against the dragoons' organized volleys, as lead bullets easily pierced their leather armor. This morning-long skirmish served as a bloody prelude to the main battle. The snow-covered ground was churned into a muddy, blood-stained mess by the retreating and advancing forces. Exhausted, both sides eventually withdrew, leaving the plains to the cold wind and the dead. Harold held the logistical advantage, being closer to his capital, Flossgard. However, Carnford's superior organization was evident when a heavy supply train arrived from the south. The quartermaster efficiently distributed supplies, including fresh meat and tea, to the troops. A hot meal and tea significantly boosted morale, with the aroma of food filling the camp. I walked among the troops with Brendan, observing their spirits and feeling the pulse of my army. Brendan reported that the snow was stopping and conditions were favorable for movement, according to local veterans. I lowered my telescope. I watched the day fade into darkness. In the distance, Carnford scouts methodically recovered their dead and finished off wounded Solonians. 10 miles away lay my greatest enemy. Defeating Harold would secure Carnford's dominance in the northern frontier and open the path to greater ambitions. Ruling the world was no longer a dream, but a clear, achievable future. I asked Brendan, if we hadn't established Carnford, would the Solonians have eventually conquered the world? Brendan was surprised by this sudden, historical hypothetical on the eve of battle. He replied cautiously, the Solonians are fierce, but they are a small, impoverished northern people. Compared to the vast, populous Plantagenet kingdom, they are like a child to a giant. Their past raids were merely for plunder, not occupation. The kingdom's army is incompetent, but if they truly mobilized their full strength, they would crush the Solonians. I smiled enigmatically. The kingdom is vast, but its mobilization efficiency is abysmal. Harold can field 100,000 men in a crisis. How many can the kingdom truly muster? Solon soldiers aren't inherently superior. They've lost to us repeatedly. Yet, they are perceived as stronger and more aggressive. Why? Because they keep winning. Victory brings wealth, confidence, and experience. They grow stronger with every raid. Conversely, the kingdom suffers constant defeat, losing territory and morale, while its bureaucracy rots. Over time, this shift in momentum could flip the balance of power. As the kingdom bleeds out and its military collapses, its millions of citizens will be defenseless. Civilizations fall not because barbarians are stronger, but because the civilization rots from within, losing the will to resist. Brendan was shaken by this cold, analytical truth, unable to respond. He had never viewed the conflict through such a long-term lens. My vision always pierced to the core. I laughed lightly and patted Brendan's shoulder. Don't worry, I was just musing. Brendan breathed a sigh of relief, fearing I had developed strategic doubts. I turned, my tone decisive. If the snow stops, we execute Operation Plan Number 1 at dawn. Check all weapons, rations, and horses. Have scouts monitor the Solon camp for any changes in routine. Harold is no fool. He's waiting for the same opening. Understood. Brendan saluted, his face hardening with resolve. Brendan left to prepare. I stared into the snowy north through my telescope, trying to pierce the darkness and the distance. Snowflakes clung to my coat. I lowered the glass and whispered into the cold air, Harold, see you tomorrow. The words vanished into the night. 10 miles away, Harold stood before his black tent, the white wolf royal banner fluttering above. Clad in bare fur and battered armor, he gripped his golden scimitar and a captured brass telescope, scanning the southern horizon. His hands trembled from cold and exhaustion as he adjusted the focus, searching for any sign of the blue-clad enemy camp. Distance and weather formed an impenetrable barrier. He saw only gray horizons and withered trees. The Carnford camp remained hidden like a beast waiting to strike. Harold lowered his arm, handing the cold telescope to Sven with a weary motion. The snow is stopping, Harold said, his voice raspy. If tomorrow is clear, we settle this on the land of our ancestors. Sven gripped the telescope tightly, as if it were a talisman. You are the greatest warrior, my brother, Sven declared, his scarred face burning with fanatical resolve. Tomorrow, you will slay me and crush Carnford. We will rebuild our strength. The North will be ours again. Harold nodded absently, lost in memory. When I first took this throne, I didn't want to just rule this frozen wasteland. I dreamed of uniting the tribes, marching south, and planting our flag in the capital, Place. I worked tirelessly, reforming tribes, forging weapons, sowing discord among the nobles. I thought it was possible. He smiled bitterly. And yet, here we are, failing to expand. We are now struggling to hold on to our own home. It is a cruel irony. Sven felt his brother's despair and was pained by it. It is not your fault, brother. It is that damned Carnford, and that I. Without them, we would be celebrating in Place right now. As Jeer stepped forward, trying to bolster morale. Brother, remember the Grey Wolf Forest? We were hunted by 3 armies. Yet we survived and conquered the north. We can do it again. Look at Flossgard. We took that fortress from the kingdom. Tomorrow will be the same. Once we kill me, the north will fall back into our hands. Sven nodded fervently. Asgir is right. Tomorrow we win. Harold listened to his lieutenant's desperate, blood-soaked optimism. They tried to use past glories to dispel the heavy gloom hanging over the army and his own heart. Suddenly, he threw his head back and let out a booming laugh. Ha! Ha ha! Laughter erupted, growing increasingly manic and echoing across the silent, frozen camp, startling the crows from nearby withered trees. Harold laughed until tears streamed down his face, as if hearing the world's greatest joke, yet his mirth masked a deep, desperate madness and a final, defiant resolve. Abruptly silencing himself, he regained his regal, imposing air. He glared at Sven and Asgir, declaring with ironclad certainty, "Good. Tomorrow at this hour, it shall be as you say." He envisioned victory, his voice rising with fierce bravado. "I shall build a monument from the skulls of tens of thousands of Carnford people and toast our triumph with their blood. After tomorrow, these 1,000 miles of northern ice." He spread his arms wide as if to embrace the world, "shall remain the hunting ground of the Solan warriors. This northern frontier belongs to me, Harold, and to all of you." Ooh! The guards and nearby officers, stirred by his charisma, raised their weapons in a low, resonant cheer, briefly reigniting the camp's fading morale. Yet, the fervor quickly dissipated into the thickening, frigid night. Harold, seemingly drained by his outburst, fell silent, staring longingly into the darkness to the south. The snow had stopped, but the temperature plummeted as night swallowed the landscape in an ink-black shroud. Only the campfires flickered like ghost lights in the void, illuminating the soldiers' weary faces and the commander's eyes, which held a mixture of grim determination and hollow uncertainty. The final, longest, and coldest night before the decisive battle had arrived. The night was pitch black and bone-chilling. The Carnford camp remained active, executing a specialized harassment mission. Teams of rocketmen moved to positions 3 miles from the Solan camp. These rockets, equipped with crude black powder warheads and stabilizer fins, screeched through the night like banshees, trailing orange flames as they arced toward the Solan camp. Their accuracy was abysmal. Most fell harmlessly into the wilderness or lost momentum mid-flight. Those that hit caused minimal damage, a few burning tents or minor casualties. However, my goal was not physical destruction. The true power of these intermittent strikes lay in the nerve-shredding screams and the constant, paralyzing fear of the unknown. It was designed to deny the Solan army sleep, exhausting their physical and mental reserves before the final clash. The plan seemed effective, as the Solan camp erupted in occasional panicked shouts, clanging gongs, and frantic orders. Yet, the tactic had a subtle, unintended effect. In the Carnford command tent, I tossed and turned on my cot, unable to sleep. Despite the warm oil lamp and brazier, a deep, restless chill permeated the space. Though I prided myself on my composure, tonight my own maxim, that a good general must be able to sleep, failed me. My mind raced with the distant sound of rockets and the shifting of sentries. Staring at the shadows on the tent ceiling, I thought of my family in Carnford. Charlotte had whispered of a second child before I left, a thought filled with both joy and the anxiety of bringing new life into a war-torn era. Little Klein's clumsy steps and his clear, childish papa were like sunlight piercing the northern frost. I felt a sense of relief for Henry and Princess Louise, who had finally wed, their happiness a beacon of hope. Even the long-standing tensions between Count Rochefort and Lady Isabel, and Duke Schmidt and Lady Irene, had thawed, united by their grandchildren and shared goals. My family, at least on the surface, was a united front, my greatest motivation and deepest vulnerability. My thoughts shifted to my loyal comrades. The steady Brendan, the bold Roland, the sharp Leon, the shadow master Richter, and the early defector, Thorstein. I felt a flicker of complexity. Despite his early contributions, Thorstein had been relegated to second-line duties. Such as politics, I thought with a bitter pang. Lineage and origin were the only true guarantees of loyalty. A defector could be used, but never fully trusted. I could offer Thorstein wealth and safety, but never core power. Then there were the people of Conford and the northern frontier, who had found stability and a burgeoning identity under my leadership. This battle was not just about my ambition. It determined the fate of thousands. Victory meant a new order. Defeat meant a return to the chaos of barbarian rule. The pressure was a crushing mountain, the responsibility a tightening vine. Thinking too much, I smiled to myself in the dark, a mix of self-mockery and resolute focus. I exhaled deeply, purging my mind. Regardless, tomorrow provides the answer. For now, I must rest. I forced my eyes shut, attempting to calm my body, though my mind remained a taut bowstring. Tomorrow would be the most important day of my life and the fate of this land. Unlike my restless night, Thomas huddled against a frozen tent pole outside the Solon camp, shivering like a dying dog in the biting wind. His thin, tattered furs offered no protection against the sub-zero night. His eyes were hollow, staring blankly into the starless void of the sky. For a low-ranking Solon soldier, winter was a brutal struggle. Thomas usually fought to survive, stealing, groveling, or trading rations for warmth. But this year, he had given up. The death of his wife and unborn child had extinguished his will to live. The defeat at Tal Valley and the loss of his comrades had broken him. He moved mechanically, a hollow shell drifting with the army. He remained alive only by inertia. Tonight, he was assigned to perimeter guard duty. "Hey, slave, get up." A brutal kick to his ribs sent him sprawling, pain searing through his side. Thomas didn't even groan. He stared blankly at the patrol of Solon soldiers, their faces twisted with disdain. A patrolman drew his curved blade, the cold steel glinting in the firelight as he leveled it at Thomas. "You piece of trash. Sleeping on watch? I should cut your head off right here." The soldier spat, his saliva landing on Thomas's face. The threat of death finally pierced Thomas's numbness. He shuddered, his gaze refocusing for a split second as he stared at the blade inches from his throat. He slowly, shakily pushed himself to his feet, maintaining a vacant, uncomprehending expression. Einar hurried over, intervening. "Brother, let it go? We're on the eve of battle. Don't waste energy on a half-dead wretch. It's bad luck and might disrupt morale." Einar was a veteran, and his words carried weight. The patrolman glared at Thomas, then at Einar, deciding the trouble wasn't worth it. He sheathed his blade with a curse. "You're lucky, dog. Next time, I'll feed you to the wolves." The patrol moved on. Einar turned to Thomas, frustrated. "Are you trying to die? If I hadn't stepped in, you'd be headless. Pull yourself together. Just survive tonight." Thomas remained silent, staring at Einar with a look of utter indifference. As Einar opened his mouth to continue, a piercing, ear-splitting whistle tore through the night from the south. The sound grew rapidly, shattering the silence. Thomas, Einar, and every nearby soldier looked up to see a dozen glowing orange streaks, Conford fire arrows, screaming toward the camp like death incarnate. Though inaccurate, the arrows were bound to hit the sprawling camp. Fire arrows. Take cover. Most landed in the snow, but two struck the camp, exploding and igniting tents and hay. Panic erupted as fire spread. "Fire! Put it out!" Gongs began to ring frantically. Officers screamed orders, struggling to organize the panicked troops. Thomas remained oblivious to the chaos. He watched the fading trails of the fire arrows with a twisted, childlike smile. "Fireworks," he whispered. "Beautiful, so beautiful." The Conford fire arrows harassed the camp all night, keeping the Solon soldiers in a state of constant, exhausted terror. Harold finally deployed elite cavalry and infantry to hunt down the attackers. Brief, bloody skirmishes broke out in the dark, leaving dozens dead on the snow. An hour before dawn, the Solon forces finally pushed the Conford archers beyond their 3-mile range, silencing the whistling death. But there was no time for rest. As the eastern horizon turned a faint gray, both armies began their preparations. "Wake up, cook, check weapons, saddle the horses." The roar of officers, the clatter of gear, and the neighing of horses flooded the snowy plains. Torches and cooking fires turned the camp into a sea of light. The exhausted army poured from their tents, forming into a massive, ready force. The day of the final battle had arrived. The pre-dawn sky remained dark, with only a faint sliver of light in the east. Two massive seas of light, 10 miles apart, hummed with activity. A tense, suffocating silence gripped the soldiers. Few dared to speak. Everyone spent these final moments silently consuming cold black bread, salted meat, or thin bean porridge. The air was thick with the scent of firewood, food, leather, rust, horse manure, and palpable tension. In the Carnford Army's infantry camp, Peter sat against a frozen stove, mechanically chewing hard black bread, as if destroying an enemy. His gaze drifted until his platoon leader, Weber, approached. Weber sat on a wooden bucket, meticulously inspecting his flintlock musket, checking the mechanism, ramrod, bayonet, and flash pan with ritualistic precision. His face, illuminated by the fire, looked grim, his eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion or emotion. Nearby, soldiers performed their own pre-battle routines, finding a sense of control in the familiar maintenance of their gear. Battalion Commander Roderick, scarred and imposing, patrolled the camp. Beside him walked Tommy, the young battalion instructor, whose eyes burned with a fanatical, determined light. Roderick stopped before a company, spoke briefly, and pushed Tommy forward, standing behind him like a mountain. Tommy took a deep breath and shouted, holding a parchment, "Attention! I have a letter written by me, Lord Carl, to be read to all Carnford soldiers." A ripple of surprise and anticipation stirred the ranks. To the soldiers, I, Lord Carl, was more than a commander. I was their father figure, their god of war, and the soul of Carnford. The fact that their lord had written to every soldier seized their undivided attention. Tommy cleared his throat and began to read. To the soldiers of Carnford. The company fell deathly silent, every eye fixed on the paper. Across the entire camp, hundreds of officers were reading the same letter, their voices weaving into a solemn chorus. Soldiers of Carnford, we come from all walks of life. Northern frontiersmen, refugees from field, wanderers from Brittany, and craftsmen from the Rhine. Many of you have wives, children, and elderly parents waiting for your return and the security of a winter harvest. You all have lives to lead, hearths to warm. So, ask yourselves, Tommy's voice rose, piercing the mist. Why do we stand here in this frozen northern wasteland, facing the brutal Solonians in a battle for our very survival? The question hung in the air, forcing the men to confront the reality of their purpose. Tommy continued, his voice heavy with power, because beyond our borders, a greedy, savage wolf hungers for our homes, our land, and our families. 10 years ago, on this very ground, the Solonian cavalry slaughtered our kin like livestock. They view us not as humans, but as two-legged sheep to be enslaved. Over 3 million of our people have died at their hands. Many of you have brothers who fled the north, having seen their families butchered in that hell. Northern-born soldiers trembled, their eyes igniting with hatred. Weber gripped his musket so hard his knuckles turned white, tears streaming down his face. Tommy's voice grew fierce. The nobles in the capital once claimed the Solonians were only a northern problem. But 3 years ago, the enemy broke the border and turned our prosperous towns into graveyards. Those in field once thought themselves safe, until the Solonian iron hooves trampled their lands and left only crows to feast on the dead. There is no such thing as not my problem. If you trade 5 cities for peace today, they will demand 10 tomorrow, until you have nowhere left to run. Carnford's prosperity was bought with the blood of our fallen. We stand before Flossgard for one reason. He paused, locking eyes with the men. To break the wolf's spine. To ensure the tragedy of the North never reaches your homes, your families, or your kin. There is no stalemate, no retreat. Only life or death. Any who falter will face the harshest military justice without mercy. Tommy roared, his voice cracking. I, Tommy Hessel, swear in the name of my fallen commander Elton and all our murdered kin, I will not take one step back. Victory or death. We fight not just for glory, but so your parents can age in peace, your wives can live in safety, and your children can grow up free from the terror we have endured. The future depends on the musket and bayonet in your hands, and the courage in your hearts. Fight for them. Peter's fear of death was replaced by warm, vivid images of his family. He saw his mother mending clothes, his brother at the shipyard, and his sister playing in the yard. He clenched his fist. He would not let the Solonians destroy this. Tommy finished reading, his voice trembling with emotion and tears. I recalled Captain Elton, who had sacrificed himself to save the line. That image merged with the future described in the letter. Solon has plagued the northern frontier for 20 years. This battle is watched by all. In this glorious battle, which decides the fate of Conford and the future of the northern frontier, I am honored to fight alongside you, the bravest and most loyal soldiers of Conford. This is the most glorious moment of my life. Let us strive together. Lord of Conford, The letter ended. Silence fell over the company, heavy with suppressed emotion. Soldiers stood stunned, eyes red, chests heaving. Every word burned like a branding iron. Fear and confusion vanished, replaced by burning resolve and a fierce desire to protect their homes. Suddenly, Peter roared, "Defend our home! Reclaim the northern frontier!" Peter's voice cracked with explosive power, his face flushed, neck veins bulging as he shouted the slogan that defined the Conford army. It was the spark to the powder keg. Reclaim the northern frontier. Kill the Solon dogs. For Conford. For our families. Long live Lord Carl. The soldiers erupted, leaping up and waving their muskets, screaming in unison. The roar spread across the entire camp, a giant awakening. Blue caps flew into the air, muskets pointed skyward, and the camp's temperature seemed to surge. My letter had ignited the souls of the 100,000-strong army. The sky brightened amidst the thunderous morale. Under leaden clouds, bugles and drums began to impose cold, rhythmic military order over the fervor. The steel machine began to move. Blue streams flowed from the camps. Thousands of soldiers formed orderly columns, marching onto the snow-covered plains. Engineers had marked the routes and assembly points with lime and flags overnight. The army moved like clockwork, their boots crunching on the snow in a rhythmic, heart-pounding thunder. The cavalry vanguard had already deployed 2 miles ahead to screen the infantry and drive off Solon scouts. Leon sat on his black horse atop a hill, his sharp gaze fixed on the Solon camp, which loomed like a crouching beast in the mist. The biting wind was cold, but his hatred burned hotter. His adjutant reported the positions. Leon stared north, toward the land where his father and kin had fallen, their flags trampled by Solonians. "Father," he whispered, his grip tightening on the reins. "Leon, today here, with the elite of Conford and the fire of vengeance, I will exact our blood debt. I will use Solon blood to honor your spirit and avenge our family by defeating Harold. Please watch me." His blue eyes burned with cold, lethal intent. The Conford-Franklin coalition formed a massive steel wall, with 4 Conford battalions and 3 Franklin battalions in the front. 5 more battalions stood in the second line, a force of over 20,000 men with bristling bayonets and fluttering flags creating a suffocating aura of death. A piercing bugle call cut through the wind. The battalion flags tilted forward, signaling the advance of the steel tide. Boom, 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 boom. The drums quickened, a heartbeat for the army. They moved. Advance. Officers roared. Tens of thousands of boots struck the earth in unison, shaking the ground. The linear formation rolled forward like a precise war machine toward the approaching Solon army. On the northern horizon, the Solon army surged like a black tide, raising clouds of snow. Scouts and light cavalry clashed in a bloody prelude, with musket fire, grenades, and clashing steel echoing across the plains. Whoosh! A terrifying screech filled the air as hundreds of fire arrows streaked across the sky like meteors, raining down on the Solon army. This was the opening barrage to disrupt the enemy and shatter their morale. In the lead Conford company, the captain began to sing to steady his men. Listen to the drums beating. Soon, the song spread from company to battalion, infecting the entire line. See the flags flying. We are the sword of the North, the sons of Conford. A rugged, murderous infantry march rose from the blue and red line, merging with the drums, the whistling arrows, and the roar of battle into a symphony of iron, blood, and death. South of Flossgard, on an unnamed wasteland, late autumn winds whipped new snow across a field bristling with armor and banners. The landscape was divided. The blue and red of the Conford-Franklin coalition advanced steadily from the south, while Harold's Solon army surged from the north like a black tide. The two forces, armed to the teeth, moved toward each other like two walls of steel and flesh closing in. The air was thick with suffocating tension. 2 miles from the core battlefield, the coalition vanguard began tactical maneuvers. Bugle calls and signals echoed as the massive columns expanded into wings. Soldiers shifted from marching columns into wide battle lines to maximize firepower. Despite the noise of tens of thousands moving, the formation maintained chilling discipline. They aimed to control the front, prevent flanking by Solon cavalry, and clear space for line infantry volleys. Between the main forces lay 5 ruined villages, now key strategic points shrouded in smoke and death. Since dawn, these ruins had served as a meat grinder for elite vanguard units. The air was filled with the clash of steel, dying screams, and the sharp, distinct cracks of matchlock muskets. Both sides recognized these ruins as vital cover and high ground. Controlling them provided essential fire positions and staging areas, especially for the Solon army to negate Conford's firepower and allow their infantry to close the distance. Harold's plan relied on securing these villages, particularly the 3 in the east. He intended to hold the east to pin down the Conford main force, while secretly shifting his elite infantry and cavalry west to crush the weaker Franklin army. Success hinged on holding the eastern villages to facilitate this defend east, attack west strategy. However, the Conford forces were equally prepared. Solon scouts were met by Conford dragoons, who had already deployed falconets and light artillery within the ruins. Fighting turned brutal. Dragoons fought on foot behind cover, while Conford heavy cavalry intercepted any Solon attempts to break through. Every wall and cellar became a site of carnage, with the snow turning brown from blood. Watching from a rear height, Harold's expression darkened as his vanguard struggled against Conford's fire. Realizing he couldn't wait, he decided to deploy his trump card. Order the White Wolf Guard to push forward. Harold roared. Take the eastern village number 2 and number 3 at any cost. Over 1,000 elite White Wolf elite cavalry charged in a wedge formation, wielding maces and spears. Their impact forced the Conford dragoons and light cavalry to retreat, loosening the coalition line. This breakthrough allowed Solon infantry to flood into the villages. With their cavalry suppressed, Conford struggled to reinforce their forward units, shifting the momentum in favor of the Solon army. Solon forces seized most of village number 2, number 3, and number 5, pinning the remaining Conford defenders into corners. Yet, just as victory seemed certain, an unforeseen disaster occurred. The westernmost village number 1, near the Franklin army, remained a stalemate despite intense fighting. The assault was led by the Cavalry Legion, composed of Scarn people and led by the Scarn noble Dominic, who prioritized his own tribe's survival. Despite his pre-battle promises, Dominic's forces were hesitant and reserved while Harold's elite bled in the east. His troops retreated at the first sign of resistance, claiming they were regrouping. His cavalry avoided direct confrontation with Conford's main force, preferring to skirmish on the periphery. What is Dominic doing? Solon commanders raged, but the lack of loyalty rendered orders ineffective. News of the total annihilation of the Ulf Sparrow Legion at Tal Valley had spread, causing panic among the non-Solon troops. Many, including Dominic, questioned why they should die for Harold. Seeing Conford's superior firepower, Dominic decided to preserve his strength for post-war negotiations. At worst, he planned to retreat north to the Scarn grassland to save his tribe. He saw no value in sacrificing his people for Harold's ambition. Consequently, the Solon army failed to secure a decisive advantage in the west. The Franklin army held their ground effectively against the half-hearted attacks. In the east, the Solon army only fully captured village number 2, while village number 3 remained contested. Village number 5 became a graveyard, with both sides holding half the ruins in a bloody stalemate. Harold's heart sank. He had failed to secure his defensive anchors in the east and had gained no staging ground in the west due to Dominic's cowardice. His grand tactical vision was severely compromised in the opening phase by internal betrayal and enemy resilience. Harold lowered his telescope, his voice cold as the northern frontier wind. He knew his vassal tribes were wavering, but their betrayal at this critical juncture was a bitter, fatal blow. The realization of Solon's decline, marked by crumbling cohesion, filled him with a mix of rage and profound despair. As the struggle for the 5 villages stabilized, the vanguard cavalry of both armies clashed like 2 massive tentacles across the open plains before pulling apart. Carnford's dragoons and hussars engaged Solon's light and skirmish cavalry in a chaotic dance of archery and melee, leaving the snow stained with blood. Both sides sought to clear the field for their main forces, but Carnford's superior firearms and discipline met Solon's exceptional horsemanship, resulting in a stalemate. As the massive infantry blocks approached, the maneuvering space vanished. Fearing the impending carnage, the cavalry officers independently chose to withdraw. Fall back, retreat to the flanks, disengage, and maintain distance. The cavalry units orderly retreated toward the flanks of their respective infantry lines. They would regroup as strategic reserves, leaving only elite scouts to linger in the narrow no-man's land, acting as the army's eyes. The vanguards halted 2 miles apart. Leon's dragoons and heavy cavalry anchored the Carnford side, while Sven personally commanded the Solon elite cavalry. The 2 forces stood in tense, vigilant opposition, officers struggling to prevent premature skirmishes. With the vanguard lines set, the true behemoths began their final formation. Form up, battalions to your positions. Standard bearers and drummers, take your places. Shouts, horns, and colorful flags signaled the massive armies into position. The Carnford-Franklin coalition adjusted their 7 frontline infantry battalions, with 5 second-line battalions moving up to fill gaps or serve as reserves. Flintlock musketeers checked ammunition while artillery moved into place, forming a wall of cold, lethal steel. The Solon army's formation appeared thicker and more chaotic. Harold placed his 20,000 armored infantry and matchlock musketeers in the center and west, using tens of thousands of militia and slaves as cannon fodder in the rear and flanks. His 10,000 cavalry spread out like a dark cloud, possessing a raw, explosive energy compared to the rigid Carnford lines. A biting wind howled across the snow-covered plains. A deathly silence hung between the 2 miles, broken only by flapping flags, neighing horses, and the heavy breathing of over 100,000 men. The Carnford-Franklin coalition, a deep blue forest of steel, reached its final battle line. Rhythmic horns and drums transformed the massive army into a single, precision-engineered machine. March. 1-2. Halt. Align. Officers' voices cut through the cold as tens of thousands of soldiers marched in perfect unison. The synchronized thud of iron-shod boots created a terrifying, rhythmic vibration that resonated through the ground and into the hearts of all observers. It was a visceral display of discipline and power. Guided by countless flags, units flowed into their pre-marked positions with professional efficiency. Despite the noise, the movement was orderly, showcasing the terrifying capability of a professional army. Carnford's formation solidified into a stable, oppressive 2-line depth. The first line, a wall of 7 infantry battalions, bristled with flintlocks and bayonets, ready to unleash a lethal firestorm. Their mission, absorb and shatter the initial Solon charge with volley fire. The second line held the elite, including the 1st and 2nd Guards battalions, positioned to exploit breakthroughs or stabilize the line. I reinforced the left flank with my own 6th Battalion, placing it under the command of the left flank officer. This was a strategic anchor, designed to counter Harold's expected western thrust and protect the rear. The 7,500 cavalry were reorganized into 2 regiments, each comprising heavy cavalry and dragoons for maximum versatility. The 1st Cavalry Regiment held the open western flank to protect the line and countercharge. The 2nd Cavalry Regiment remained under my direct command as a strategic reserve for the decisive blow. Carnford's deployment eschewed trickery for a straightforward, crushing display of force. They intended to advance steadily, leveraging superior firepower, discipline, and organization. Against such a disparity in formation and strength, Harold's tactical maneuvers would struggle to find purchase. Having secured Village No. 1 and Village No. 4, Carnford held vital support points despite losing Village No. 2. These villages acted as wedges, shielding infantry and securing the left flank. Both armies, tempered by years of war, completed their final adjustments simultaneously, ready for the clash. Under a leaden sky, two massive armies stood in silent confrontation across the snow-covered plains. Suddenly, as if by mutual agreement, the commanders' flags were hoisted high in the center of both lines, snapping in the biting wind. The southern line displayed a deep blue flag bearing a silver spruce, symbolizing the unyielding spirit of the Northern Territory. The northern line raised a cyan banner featuring a ferocious white wolf, representing the savage ambition of the tribal coalition. The blue spruce flag and the white wolf royal banner faced each other across the void. No shouts or drums broke the silence, yet the air crackled with the palpable, lethal intent of over 100,000 soldiers. A suffocating stillness gripped the battlefield, broken only by the wind whistling through countless spears and blades. The final moment had arrived. On a ridge behind the Solon center, Harold gripped his reins, peering through a brass telescope at the solidifying blue wall on the southern horizon. His weathered face, usually hard as stone, betrayed a rare, subtle tremor of unease. Through the lens, the Concord-Franklin coalition appeared as a deep blue stream, with the Franklin Army's red patches bleeding into the icy formation. The stream solidified into a forest of steel, with Conford's blue spruce flags and various unit banners snapping in the winter sun. More chilling were the thousands of silent faces beneath standard-issue caps and the dense thicket of bayonets reflecting cold, metallic light. Sunlight glinted off the metal, creating a shimmering, predatory effect like the eyes of beasts in the dark. At the front, polished field cannons pointed north, with gunners standing like statues. Harold noted the disciplined second line behind the front, signaling the enemy's significant depth and reserves. What pressured Harold most was the deathly, solidified solemnity of the massive formation. The lack of noise, no shouting, no restless horses, was the ultimate manifestation of discipline, confidence, and the will to kill. The aura of steel, gunpowder, and pure destruction was so intense it chilled even the battle-hardened Harold, causing his hand to tighten on the reins. Conford. Harold lowered his telescope, his gaze locked on the blue defense line, his heart churning with complex emotions. As the king of the northern frontier, he had seen every army in the Plantagenet kingdom, but this force felt fundamentally different. It wasn't just the equipment or the drill. His musketeer guard had mimicked these for years. It was the spirit, a unified, calm confidence that suggested every soldier knew why they fought and believed in victory. Why? Harold wondered, frustrated. Same muskets, same spear phalanxes, similar manuals. Why does my Solon musketeer guard feel inferior to my troops in spirit? Does I use some magic? Or is it those instructors, the officers who live with the men and preach about defending the homeland? Harold found the idea absurd. War was about survival and plunder, not rhetoric. Yet the silent, mountain-like enemy forced him to respect the power behind those empty words. A ripple of anxiety disturbed his composure, but he forcibly suppressed it. His iron will, forged in blood, was his foundation. He inhaled the icy air, dismissing the gloom. The die was cast, and dwelling on spirit was pointless. His eyes drifted to Joel, a silent officer beside him. Joel was a subordinate of Luoyao, the former musketeer guard commander Harold had executed. The memory brought a flicker of regret. After a crushing defeat at Conford, Harold had vented his rage on Luoyao, ordering him to hold the rear and effectively sending him to his death. He later realized the defeat stemmed from structural gaps in Solon's military system, logistics, and morale, not Luoyao's command. Killing Luoyao had only alienated the defectors and non-tribal officers, leading to a loss of talent and stability. Now, with no capable commander left for the musketeer guard, he had to rely on the obscure Joel. With other commanders at their posts, Joel was the only one left to consult. Harold had positioned the musketeer guard in the center as the pillar of his defense. "Joel," Harold said, his voice low, "you fought Conford before. What is I planning with this formation?" I watched Harold's banners through the wind and turned to Brendan. "Every formation has a weakness. If you were to strike, where would you break them?" Brendan scanned the enemy lines. Harold is massing troops on our left to pressure our center, hoping to force us to shift our rear and create chaos. Since we remain steady, he is hesitant to attack. He paused, then stated firmly, "Since he won't move, we must break the stalemate. The key is the right flank." "Then start with the right," I ordered. "Make Harold move. Tell the 4th Battalion to attack village number 2. On the left of the Conford line, a small but lethal force completed its assembly. Otto sat on his horse, his blue cloak snapping in the wind. He gripped my written order, his eyes fixed on the ruins of village number 2 half a mile away. The village was a skeleton of burnt timber and stone, now a fortified nest for 500 elite Solon wolf and bear soldiers. Intelligence warned that 4,000 Solon cavalry were hidden in a nearby depression, ready to hammer any force that attacked the village. Yet, Otto felt no fear, only the focus of a hunter. My order to clear this obstacle was a test of trust and a pivotal move for the left flank. I had meticulously prepared for the assault on village number 2. I deployed 1,000 trained militia to construct a breastwork using felled trees, door panels, and wagons, reinforced by simple trenches dug under engineer supervision. To further fortify the position, they drew on northern frontier tactics, dousing the breastwork and the slope in front of it with icy water from a nearby creek. The freezing wind turned the slope into a mirror-like sheet of ice, rendering it nearly impossible for infantry or cavalry to scale. This obstacle effectively neutralized the Solon cavalry's flanking potential, significantly easing the burden on Otto's main force. Otto issued his orders to his battalion commanders: execute Plan 1. The 1st and 2nd Infantry Battalions, supported by the regimental artillery, will clear the village outposts to create a breach and draw out the defenders. Over 1,500 Carnford infantry transitioned from marching formation into attack squares. The force consisted primarily of line infantry equipped with muskets and spears, with a contingent of pikemen for close-quarters combat. 4 attack squares formed, resembling solid blocks of blue steel. Soldiers fixed bayonets and readied their spears in grim silence. A chilling atmosphere of impending slaughter permeated the ranks. Artillery officers roared as the cannons were pushed forward, positioning themselves 50 paces behind the infantry squares. Otto's arsenal included 4 9-pounder field guns for fortifications, 4 4-pounder regimental guns for anti-personnel suppression, and 4 minion cannons for clearing ruins. As horns blared and drums beat, the first 2 attack squares began their advance. Thousands of boots crunched in unison on the frozen snow, while the forest of spears caught the dim light with a cold, metallic glint. Behind the pikemen, musketeers marched with bayonets leveled, forming a slow, inexorable wall of death. The second-line squares followed 100 paces behind. Serving as a reserve and flank guard, the massive formation crept toward the ruins of village number 2 like a spreading blue blight. From the second floor of a partially collapsed stone house, Sven watched the approaching Carnford forces through his telescope. Clad in blood-stained iron-studded leather armor, the hardened warrior felt the immense pressure of holding this key position, which only fueled his ferocity. "They're fast, and their formation is tight," Sven spat, his tension mounting as he observed their discipline. He noted a skirmisher detachment moving ahead of the main force, utilizing terrain and debris for cover. "Skirmishers," Sven muttered to his officer, his voice laced with disdain. He knew these men, armed with bayonet-fixed flintlock muskets, were designed to harass, snipe officers, and disrupt formations. "Pass the order," Sven commanded coldly. "Once they hit the 100-pace mark, have our 2 3-pounder bronze cannons fire on the skirmishers. Hold the main force. When they reach 70 paces, have the archers and musketeers focus fire on their flanks. If we break their front, their own retreating troops will collapse the second line. That's when our cavalry will ride out and finish them." His strategy relied on using the village's defenses to shatter the enemy's momentum, create chaos, and then crush them with a cavalry charge. Leon approached, looking worried. "General Sven, we've lost the initiative on the right flank. Holding this village is vital to protect the Emperor's main offensive. We must not fail here. Carnford reinforcements could arrive at any moment." Sven acknowledged the logic. With Harold's defend east, attack west strategy under pressure, He could not afford unnecessary risks. I understand, Sven nodded, his fighting spirit undimmed. We hold, but we make them pay dearly for every inch. A lookout shouted, skirmishers at 100 paces. Sven roared, fire. 2 orange flashes erupted from the ruins as the Solan army's crude, locally made bronze 3-pounders fired, sending clouds of smoke and snow into the air. The shots were inaccurate due to poor craftsmanship and inexperienced crews. One shot missed, but the other slammed directly into the edge of a Carnford spear phalanx. The impact was horrific. The solid iron shot tore through the dense ranks with devastating kinetic energy. 5 or 6 spearmen were obliterated, their limbs and armor fragments spraying into the cold air. The ball embedded itself in the frozen earth, leaving a bloody, visceral gap in the formation. Even the veteran Carnford soldiers recoiled for a split second, the reality of death momentarily stalling their advance. Through his telescope, Sven watched the carnage with a cruel grin. Taste the iron, you bastards. Let's see how neat your formation stays now. The psychological impact of artillery was far greater than any cold weapon. Yet, Carnford discipline held. Officers screamed, don't stop. Keep moving. Reform. Fill the gaps. Avenge your brothers. Under the pressure of NCOs and veterans, the square recovered, and soldiers stepped forward to fill the gaps. The formation continued its advance, stepping over the cooling bodies of their comrades with even colder, more lethal intent. Meanwhile, on the distant right flank, Carnford rockets streaked across the sky toward the Solan cavalry's assembly area. Though the results were unclear, the screams of horses and men indicated the rockets had successfully disrupted the Solan cavalry. Seeing this, Sven frowned but then hardened his gaze. The Emperor is attacking their left flank, and they're responding with rockets. We need to hit them harder. I won't have it easy today. Having suffered dozens of casualties from the artillery strike, the 4 Carnford attack squares pushed to within 150 paces of the village ruins. The distance reached the effective range of the village's bows and matchlocks, marking an ideal starting point for a charge. Suddenly, massive command flags in the Carnford army waved violently, followed by a piercing metallic signal that echoed across the field. Halt! Form up! Officers roared in unison with the signal. Over 1,000 soldiers shouted in unison, stopping their advance with mechanical precision. The rhythmic stomping ceased, leaving a suffocating silence broken only by the wind and the groans of the wounded. The phalanx adjusted rapidly as officers barked. Align! Check weapons! Check powder! Spearmen hold! Musketeers reload! Simultaneously, the Carnford artillery, trailing the infantry, displayed remarkable efficiency. Push the guns. Drop them. Clear the bores. Load charges. Solid shot. Move. Artillery officers roared, and the gunners worked like clockwork. They shoved the heavy cannons through the infantry gaps to the front, unlimbered them, and adjusted the elevation with crowbars and shoulders. Assistant gunners quickly retrieved wet wool sponges, silk powder bags, and heavy iron solid shot. The process was chaotic yet methodical. 11 dark muzzles aimed at the ruins of village number 2, 150 paces away, as gunners crouched with lintstocks. Carnford intended to pulverize the stronghold and its stubborn Solan defenders with superior firepower. As the Carnford guns readied, the 2 Solan bronze cannons roared again, either sensing the threat or attempting to boost morale. 2 3-pound iron balls slammed into the Carnford lines, which were now stationary and prepared. While casualties occurred, the impact was less shocking than before, though the sight of iron tearing through flesh still tested the soldiers' nerves. Sven watched the effect from the village, finding a cathartic pleasure in the retaliation, as if it could offset the Solan army's technological disadvantage. Knowing the impending hell of the Carnford artillery, he gripped his scimitar and shouted, "Take cover. Survive this, and when their infantry moves in, it's our turn." As skirmishers engaged in a brutal exchange, the 11 Carnford cannons finally unleashed their fury. Fire! The roar was deafening. 4 9-pounders fired in unison, spitting flames and thick smoke, their carriages recoiling violently against the restraints. 4 heavy iron balls tore through the air, slamming into village number 2. Explosions and the sound of shattering debris followed. One shot struck a crumbling wall, turning it into a lethal spray of frozen earth, stone, and Solan soldier limbs. Another obliterated a makeshift bunker, turning wood, snow, and men into a gory rain. Others pierced buildings, causing internal collapses and chaos. 4 4-pound regimental guns followed, their smaller, rapid-fire shots hailing down on suspected firing points. Finally, 3 minion cannons fired grenades and incendiary shells, arcing over the ruins to sow fire and shrapnel deep within the village. A single barrage left village number 2 a wreck of smoke, dust, and debris, filled with screams and the groans of collapsing structures. The ruins were left scarred with craters and carnage. Under the bombardment, the Solan musketeers huddled in their bunkers, their officers' cries of "hold steady," drowned out by the destruction. Death was everywhere. Comrades were shredded by shrapnel or buried alive. The air reeked of gunpowder, blood, and charred flesh. Many raw recruits turned pale, their hands trembling uncontrollably as they clutched their muskets. The glory they once imagined had vanished, replaced by mud, cold, hunger, and the imminent threat of annihilation. Carnford's strategy was clear: avoid a costly infantry assault on the ruins, instead using artillery and skirmishers to grind down the defenders' morale and numbers. This cold, modern warfare left the Solan warriors, accustomed to melee combat, feeling helpless and terrified. The 2 small Solan bronze cannons continued to fire back, but their efforts were like a child fighting a giant, failing to shake the Carnford line. Between the forces, white smoke drifted, and the persistent crackle of flintlock muskets signaled the steady death of Solan soldiers. The pressure tightened like an iron band around the hearts of the recruits, pushing their nerves to the breaking point. "I can't take it anymore." After another barrage and relentless sniping, the breaking point arrived. A shell-shocked recruit, eyes bloodshot with terror, saw a Carnford skirmisher aiming from 70 paces away and snapped. Forgetting orders and discipline, he pulled his trigger in a blind act of survival and fear. Bang! A lone, sharp flintlock report erupted from behind a low wall. This unauthorized shot acted as a spark in a powder keg, instantly triggering the collapsing Solan line. They fired. Shoot! Kill them all! Fear triggered a chain reaction. The Solan soldiers' suppressed terror erupted into hysterical, blind aggression as the first shots rang out. Across the ruins of village number 2, countless flintlocks and matchlocks fired in a chaotic, rhythmic chain reaction. Bang, bang, bang. A deafening, disorganized roar of gunfire erupted. Muzzle flashes flickered behind mud walls and windows, while thick white smoke quickly engulfed the village, obscuring all visibility. The volley was loud, but largely ineffective. Lacking unified command, the shots were scattered. Most lead balls missed the distant, sheltered Carnford skirmishers, striking only the snow and earth. Still, over a dozen Carnford soldiers fell. The rest, experienced and alert, dropped or took cover the moment the Solan muzzle flashes appeared, avoiding the worst of the frantic fire. As the smoke cleared, the firing became sporadic. Solan officers shouted and lashed out, trying to regain control, but their lines were in disarray. Many recruits stood dazed, some fumbling to reload, others staring blankly at the carnage they had wrought. The Carnford skirmishers had succeeded. Their harassment and psychological pressure had forced Sven's lines to waste ammunition and collapse into command chaos. Standing in the rear, Sven watched the breakdown, his face ashen and teeth gritted in frustration. His tactical plan had failed in a humiliating farce. He felt as if Roland, the Carnford commander, were mocking him through a telescope. Useless trash, Sven cursed, sensing the most dangerous moment of the battle was at hand. The Carnford infantry did not hesitate. As the Solan lines faltered in the smoke, the charge began. Boom, 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 boom. The rapid war drums shattered the battlefield's brief lull. Advance. For Carnford. Charge. Officers roared, and the 4 Carnford infantry squares surged forward like iron beasts unleashed. With bayonets leveled and spears lowered, they marched steadily toward the smoking ruins, their rhythmic steps shaking the frozen earth. Cavalry. Flank their left. Sven barked to a messenger, refusing to let the enemy approach so easily. 1,000 Solan cavalry emerged from a low-lying area, howling and brandishing scimitars to strike the Conford flank and buy time for the defenders. They charged toward the exposed side, only to run headlong into a prepared hedgehog formation. Halt! Turn left. Spearmen, form up, the flanking infantry square commanded. Spearmen braced their 4-meter oak shafts against their feet, angling the steel tips outward. Instantly, the square bristled with a dense, lethal forest of spear points. Musketeers lined up behind them, leveling their flintlocks and bayonets as a second wall of death. Nay, the Solon cavalry's momentum stalled before the iron hedgehog. Unsuited for charging disciplined infantry, the Solon riders knew a direct assault would be suicide. Turn. Scatter, the officer ordered. The cavalry veered away in 2 arcs, avoiding the square like a tide hitting a reef. Only a few bold scouts darted past, firing arrows and shouting provocations to distract the formation. Otto's square remained rock solid, ignoring the harassment to protect the main force's flank. Meanwhile, the main Conford force reached the edge of the village ruins. Fire! Sven screamed. 2 Solon bronze cannons unleashed canister shot, spraying a storm of lead into the approaching Conford ranks. Puff, puff. Art. A dozen Conford soldiers fell in a spray of blood, though 1 cannon misfired, leaving the gunners frantically struggling with the breach. The gap closed instantly. Conford soldiers surged over their fallen comrades into the ruins. Solon musketeers, having emptied their guns, scrambled to grab bows, but their scattered arrows were useless in the close-quarters melee. Kill. Die, Solon dogs. Steel met flesh, bayonets clashed with scimitars, and spears met battle axes in the narrow alleys and ruined corners. A brutal, close-quarters slaughter erupted across every inch of village number 2, with blood staining the snow and walls as the battle turned into a desperate struggle for survival. On a command platform 1.5 miles from the bloody village number 2, I and Brendan observed the battlefield through telescopes, the biting wind ignoring the tactical intensity below. The distant roar of cannons and screams were reduced to pure tactical data by the howling wind. Brendan lowered his telescope, frowning at the right flank where the Cranford 7th and 4th Battalions were locked in a stalemate with Solon forces amidst the complex terrain. The right flank is stalled, Brendan noted. Should we reinforce with the 1st Guards Battalion or have the 1st Cavalry Regiment flank them? He added that Solon had not yet committed their elite troops, using the terrain and the partial control of village number 5 to stall, while their main cavalry force remained idle. I remained unmoved, my voice steady. Not yet. Harold likely desires this stalemate, I analyzed. He hasn't committed his core cavalry or musketeer guard to a decisive strike. He is waiting on village number 2. If Sven holds, Harold will escalate elsewhere. Committing our reserves now would reveal our hand and allow him to shift his heavy forces to an unexpected sector. Let the right flank remain deadlocked. We need to pressure Harold into moving his reserves and revealing his true intent. I ordered, have the rocket artillery company move to range and fire 10-shot salvos at the Solon cavalry assembly areas and infantry rear. I want continuous noise and explosions to disrupt their rhythm and force Harold to react. The messenger sprinted away. I explained my strategy. Solon's strength is their cavalry mobility. If we crush Sven at village number 2 too quickly, their left flank cavalry will simply retreat or bypass us. That is not what I want. I want his cavalry trapped in controlled stalemates across the front, village number 2, the right flank, and the center. I need them exhausted or indecisive. Brendan realized the plan. Once the cavalry was bogged down and stripped of mobility, my hidden 2nd Cavalry Regiment would deliver the killing blow. Brendan agreed, noting that Harold might see through this, but the bloody fight at village number 2 might trick him into committing his main cavalry to save the position. I suddenly locked onto the center, near village number 3. Here it comes. Brendan watched as 2,000 to 3,000 Solon infantry, likely part of the Musketeer Guard, detached from the main force toward village number 3. Harold is reinforcing the center, Brendan said. Is he trying to break through to our rear? It's a key move, I said. Village number 3 is the pivot. He wants to control the center to threaten our flanks. I ordered, send 2 musketeer companies from the right flank to reinforce village number 3. Tell them to hold at all costs. If Harold wants to stoke the fire, we'll add fuel. The order was executed with high efficiency. Simultaneously, the rocket artillery on the left flank began their barrage. Whoosh! 10 rockets trailing orange flames tore through the sky, diving toward the Solon right flank and their cavalry assembly areas. Boom! Boom! The explosions caused panic among the Solon troops and horses, creating significant psychological pressure and visible disorder in their ranks. Harold reacted within 15 minutes, shifting his forces again. A staff officer reported, "The Solon Hound Legion is moving toward village number 2, and 1,500 cavalry are moving toward village number 5. I smiled, a cold, sharp expression of total control. I scanned the battlefield again. Across a 10-mile front, the battle had escalated into a chaotic, boiling cauldron of attrition. Every key node was now contested as both sides committed their reserves. Finally, I whispered, "The stalemate is broken. Harold, you couldn't resist throwing more into the pot." I turned to Brendan. "Order the front lines to hold. Tell Roland to take village number 2 slowly. Drag the Hound Legion into the mud. Tell the commanders at villages number 3 and 5. They are the nails holding the Solon army in place." I looked toward the white wolf royal banner in the distance. "Now, we see whose fire burns longer and whose bones are harder. We wait to see who seizes the decisive moment." Boom, boom, boom. Heavy war drums thundered on the west side of the Solon line. 2,000 Solon infantry began their advance toward village number 5. Harold's western offensive had begun, showing adjustments based on previous failures. Dozens of shield carts, improvised wooden structures covered in cowhide and quilts, led the way, providing mobile cover against arrows and musket fire. Behind them came waves of heavy infantry in iron-studded leather and chainmail, armed with spears and axes, their eyes hungry for the bounty. Light cavalry guarded the flanks of the column, ready to exploit any breakthrough. Hundreds of skirmishers and musketeers followed in the rear, providing the ranged cover Harold had learned was necessary to counter Cranford's tactics. At the end of their path, the ruins of village number 5 stood silent in the snow. Village number 5, like village number 2, is a contested front line. Half is held by 2 elite infantry battalions under Duke Schmidt. While often considered less battle-hardened than my Confort soldiers, the Schmidt family's troops are professional and well-trained. Equipped with standard flintlock muskets, bayonets, and armor, they possess significant artillery, including field guns capable of firing solid shot and canister shot. Their discipline and gear make them a formidable force. Harold ordered his 5 reliable cannons to bombard the village to clear a path for his infantry. Boom, boom. The cannons fired, but the Solon artillery's limitations were immediately apparent. Most shots missed, hitting the empty snow or flying harmlessly over the ruins. Only a few struck the outer walls, causing minimal damage. The village's defenses and the defenders' morale remained intact. As the shelling ceased, Solon infantry pushed shield carts forward, advancing like a dark tide across the snow. "Wait until they are within 250 paces. Fire," the Schmidt artillery commander ordered. Boom, boom, boom. The 9-pound field guns roared, sending iron-solid shots tearing through the air into the advancing Solon ranks. Splat. Art. The solid shots carved bloody trenches through the dense infantry, tearing bodies apart with unstoppable force. Limbs, armor fragments, and viscera sprayed across the field, turning the path into a corridor of death. Each hit killed or maimed dozens, staining the white snow into a muddy, gore-streaked mess. Asgir, the Solon commander, watched in agony as his precious, non-slave troops were slaughtered. After years of war and losses against Confort, every adult Solon warrior was irreplaceable. Yet, the Solon soldiers' legendary toughness held firm. Despite the carnage, the rear ranks stepped over their fallen comrades, driven forward by officers and the threat of the execution squads. The scent of blood and the pressure from behind only fueled their primal ferocity. Harold had promised immense rewards: land, slaves, grain, and silver. For these impoverished soldiers, these rewards were a beacon of hope, driving them to ignore fear for a chance at a new life. They howled, eyes bloodshot, charging madly toward the fire-spewing ruins. Thump, thump, thump. The war drums behind the Solon lines quickened, pushing the soldiers to their limits. The infantry accelerated from a steady march to a full-blown sprint. "Kill them! For the land! For the White Wolf banner!" they screamed. The collective roar of 2,000 warriors drowned out the wind and artillery. Driven by survival and greed, they rushed the ruins with scaling ladders and battering rams, a tide of steel and fury. Artillery. Canister shot. Fire. The Franklin officer remained calm despite the overwhelming charge. Boom. Boom. The cannons unleashed a metal storm of lead balls and iron shards into the Solon ranks within 100 paces. Uft. My face. Help. The front line of Solon soldiers collapsed as if hitting an invisible wall. Their shield carts were shredded. Blood sprayed everywhere, and the snow was instantly covered in twitching bodies, halting the momentum of the charge. Yet, the Solonians did not break. The rear ranks surged over the corpses, driven by a desperate, blood-fueled mania. The death of their comrades only made the promised rewards seem more tangible. They just had to cross the killing zone. Asgir, seeing the effectiveness of the Franklin fire, realized that stopping to return fire would only lead to further slaughter. He roared, "Don't stop. Close the distance. Melee. Kill them all." After suffering massive casualties, the Solon elite finally breached the outer perimeter and engaged the Franklin forces in close-quarters combat. "Hold the line. For the Duke. For glory," the Franklin soldiers shouted, meeting the charge head-on. The village perimeter transformed into a slaughterhouse. Franklin spearmen thrust through wall gaps, while Solon swordsmen and axemen hacked at the fortifications and attempted to raise ladders. The clash of steel, the thud of axes on shields, and the screams of the dying filled the air as the two sides traded lives in a brutal, primitive struggle. Behind the ruins, Franklin's musketeers fired in disciplined volleys at the Solonians attempting to scale the walls. Each volley mowed down the front line, but the Solonians relentlessly climbed over their own fallen comrades. Though perhaps less fanatical than the Carnford army, the Franklin troops were seasoned professionals. They excelled in urban warfare. When Solonians finally breached the perimeter, brutal close-quarters combat erupted. The invading Solonians quickly realized the fight had not become easier. Franklin's forces broke into small squads, using ruins for cover while musketeers sniped from high ground. Spearmen and swordsmen formed tight formations in narrow alleys, utilizing the terrain to inflict heavy casualties on the intruders. The village became a deafening slaughterhouse, with every building contested and casualties mounting rapidly. I watched through my telescope, satisfied as my troops outperformed the Solonian elite. I knew holding village number 5 was vital for my family's status in the northern frontier. Meanwhile, on the eastern plains, a decisive cavalry battle began. Leon raised his saber, shouting, "Carnford warriors, charge! For glory and revenge!" Backed by his 3,000-strong 1st Cavalry Regiment, including heavy cavalry and dragoons, he led Carnford's sharpest blade. He ordered a 3-wave staggered charge to crush the Solon cavalry. The Carnford cavalry shifted into a wide, layered formation. The horses accelerated into a thundering gallop. Thousands of hooves shook the frozen earth, creating a terrifying roar. They charged like 3 massive snow dragons, their momentum far exceeding that of infantry. Facing them was the Solon cavalry, caught off guard. Following Dominic's removal, Ivar had been hastily placed in command. The leadership change caused confusion and distrust within the Solon ranks. Ivar attempted to order a mix of frontal defense and flanking harassment. Some Solonians charged, while others attempted their usual horse archery maneuvers. Leon's wide formation compressed the space, neutralizing the Solonian flanking tactics. The Solonians lacked the discipline and resolve of the professional Carnford riders. The impact was devastating. The first wave of heavy cavalry smashed into the Solonians, causing carnage. Carnford's lances and sabers tore through the disorganized ranks. The Solon line shattered, suffering catastrophic losses. Solon skirmishers fired arrows from the flanks, causing some casualties, but failed to stop the momentum. Leon ignored the harassment, keeping his troops focused on the relentless forward charge. Only a few saber cavalry used short-barreled guns to disperse the skirmishers. As the first wave broke through, the second and third waves followed, crushing the recovering Solonians. The continuous, wave-like assault left the Solan cavalry stunned. Ivar lost all control as his orders were drowned out by the chaos. The Solan formation collapsed, with many soldiers fleeing. After 3 waves, the Carnford cavalry withdrew in order to regroup. Though tired, they remained disciplined and ready to finish the job. Ivar felt a cold, paralyzing despair, fearing execution by Harold. Suddenly, drums echoed. Harold's elite White Wolf royal banner appeared with 1,000 fresh, formidable guards. Ivar felt a brief surge of hope, believing they might stabilize the line. The hope was short-lived. A sharp horn blast sounded from the south. My 2nd Cavalry Regiment, a massive fresh force, emerged like a blue tide to join the fray. The fleeting hope was instantly replaced by absolute despair. Ivar turned pale. My reserve force had mobilized to meet Harold's elite guard, signaling a brutal cavalry clash on the snowfields. With their own forces shattered and morale low, the tide was turning toward the abyss. Awoo! The Solan White Wolf elite cavalry let out a bestial roar, charging forward as a silver-gray wave of death with leveled lances and sabers. Opposite them, the Carnford's 2nd Cavalry Regiment remained silent, their resolve manifest in the thunder of hooves and the cold glint of steel. These 2 elite forces collided like iron torrents on the open snowfield east of Village No. 5. Boom! Time seemed to freeze at the moment of impact, followed by a deafening symphony of destruction. It was a violent collision of flesh, bone, steel, and will at maximum velocity. The front ranks were launched into the air like ragdolls before they could even strike, the sound of splintering bones filling the air. Lances shattered or pierced armor, skewering riders who were then flung into the bloody snow as the shafts snapped under the immense force. The front lines were obliterated instantly, clearing a bloody path for those behind. The 2 torrents tore through each other, trading death in every inch of space. Leon watched from a nearby ridge, having reorganized his 1st Cavalry Regiment, witnessing the carnage. The scene triggered memories of a frozen riverbank years ago, where he had nearly died after falling into a Solan Scout unit ambush. Once the prey, he was now the hunter, watching the battle with cold, vengeful satisfaction. Seeing the proud White Wolf elite cavalry decimated, he felt only the cruel cycle of war. As the 2 forces disengaged, the disparity in their condition became clear. The Carnford cavalry utilized superior discipline to disperse into pre-planned safety zones, distancing themselves from the Solan remnants. The exhausted, disorganized Solan cavalry, however, faced a new, lethal threat. Target the retreating cavalry. Canister shot, grape shot, rapid fire. Musketeers, cover fire at 150 paces. The Carnford artillery and musketeers received the cold command, targeting the stalled, clustered Solan riders. Boom, boom. Field guns unleashed a metallic storm of canister and grape shot into the densest clusters of Solan cavalry. Nay, my leg. No. The roar of cannons mixed with the screams of men and horses. The Solan vanguard collapsed as if hitting an invisible wall, trampled by their own panicked mounts. Simultaneously, Carnford's mobile rocket launchers opened their panels. Whoosh! Hundreds of small rockets with orange tails shrieked toward the chaotic Solan ranks like an angry swarm. Though inaccurate, their massive coverage and terrifying noise sowed panic. The rockets exploded mid-air or upon impact, tearing through the frozen earth and riders, creating a psychological and physical nightmare. Musketeer volleys followed, the dense lead rain further punishing the Solan ranks. Smoke and fire obscured the battlefield, turning the area into a chaotic, smoke-filled hellscape where only the shadows of falling men and horses remained visible. From a distance, Harold watched through a telescope, his fingers trembling. Every explosion felt like a strike against his own heart. These White Wolf elite cavalry were the symbol of Solan's power and his most loyal kin. Watching them die in the fire, he was consumed by rage and grief. Regroup! Regroup! His generals screamed, though the order likely failed to reach the broken ranks. As the smoke cleared, the carnage was revealed. Of the 4,000 White Wolf elite cavalry, fewer than 2,000 remained, most wounded and demoralized, their formation shattered. Rumble! At this moment of despair, a heavy, rhythmic thundering of hooves approached from the northeast. Harold, Ivar, and the survivors turned, filled with a mix of desperate hope and overwhelming dread. Leon's 1st Cavalry Regiment, now reorganized and joined by flanking units, stood ready in a terrifying formation. Lances like a forest and sabers gleaming, the blue-clad army waited in silence for the final charge. In contrast, the Solon survivors were broken, their horses panicked and their ranks in total disarray. It's over. The thought dawned on every surviving Solon soldier, including Ivar and the guard commander. The Solon cavalry had lost every tactical advantage. They were now merely fish on a chopping block, awaiting the final blow. Woo! A long, chilling Carnford military horn blast cut through the battlefield's chaos, sounding like a death knell across the frozen plains. Carnford, advance. For victory. The 2,000 remaining Solon cavalry watched in their final moments as the blue tide of death accelerated, a sea of steel blades and musket points converging into a blinding, lethal torrent rushing toward them. It was a light of destruction and finality. Then, the thunder of iron hooves drowned out everything else. I lowered my monocular, the cold bronze tube still carrying the phantom scent of distant carnage. Standing on the command platform, the wind carried the filtered, chaotic sounds of battle, gunfire, shouts, and neighs, which I processed as clear, cold data. On the left, Duke Schmidt held firm against Isgir at village number 5. On the right, Leon's cavalry had shattered the Solon center, forcing Harold's royal guards into a costly engagement and seizing the initiative. The most critical sector was now the area near village number 2. I mused on Sven, the stubborn Solon commander who, despite heavy artillery and relentless assault, was still clinging to the ruins of village number 2 in brutal urban warfare. Yet, the cost of this defense was evident. Solon flags were vanishing, resistance was shrinking, and the blue tide of Carnford was steadily advancing. Sven's repeated, desperate pleas for reinforcements to the center signaled he was at his breaking point. "Brendan," I said calmly, "the Solon center is broken, and Isgir is stalled at village number 5. Only Sven remains, and he is at his limit. Is this not the opportunity we've awaited?" Brendan didn't hesitate, pointing at the map. "Exactly, sir. Sven's forces are at their weakest. We don't need more main force. The 4th Battalion, acting as reserves, can join Otto's frontal assault to annihilate them and take village number 2. He pointed to the 7th Battalion on the right. "The key is here. If the 7th Battalion suddenly pivots west to strike the flank of the enemy currently opposing them, Harold will be forced to divert his dwindling reserves to plug the gap." Brendan tapped the center. "Once Harold's reserves are drawn away, our hidden general reserve, the 1st Guards Battalion and our rested cavalry, can strike through the gap, bypassing the flanks to hit Harold's central command directly." "It is a strike at the heart," Brendan concluded. "If we shatter Harold's command, the entire Solon line will collapse. Their 100,000-strong army faces total annihilation." I processed the plan. It mirrored my own thoughts, but with bolder, finer detail. The risk was the temporary exposure of the 7th Battalion's original position, but the reward was a decisive victory for the northern frontier. I nodded firmly. "Order the 7th Battalion to leave a skeleton crew and pivot west immediately. Force Harold to commit his reserves. Simultaneously, pressure village number 3 and the center to force the Solon army back and create panic, setting the stage for our final strike." The bugles sounded, turning the commander's resolve into action. The Carnford war machine roared to life, aiming its blade at the enemy's heart. In stark contrast, the atmosphere under Harold's White Wolf royal banner was suffocating, thick with failure and creeping dread. A blood-drenched officer stumbled in. "Your Majesty, General Ivar is dead. Our center cavalry is routed, and the royal guards are decimated. Your Majesty, Sven reports village number 2 is failing. We need reinforcements. Your Majesty, Isgir reports heavy casualties at village number 5. Progress is stalled. Your Majesty, the Carnford main force is advancing on the center. General Gran requests reinforcements to hold the line." The bad news arrived like a blizzard. Harold kicked over the map stand, roaring, "Useless! I gave you the best warriors, and this is how you repay me? Ivar lost my guards, Sven can't hold a village, and Isgir can't beat a bunch of Franklins." His generals stood frozen until an old advisor whispered, "Your Majesty, calm is needed to stabilize the troops." Harold breathed heavily, forcing down his rage. He was the king. He could not afford to break. He regained his composure and raised his monocular toward the center. Through the smoke, he saw the blue Carnford squares advancing with terrifying, rhythmic precision. Their musket volleys flashed like thunder, melting his lines like ice under the sun. To the west, new enemy movements signaled further pressure on his flanks. The center, it cannot fall, Harold muttered, his face dark. He weighed his two remaining, high-risk options. Option 1, a desperate, all-out gamble. Commit his last reserves, the Musketeer Guard and all remaining forces, to a suicidal counterattack against the Carnford center. The goal, shatter the Carnford Command Corps before they could flank Sven. Success would mean a miraculous turnaround. Failure would mean total destruction. If the attack failed to break the enemy, the Solan army would be spent, leaving them no choice but to face annihilation from all sides. Option 2, conservative withdrawal. Use the reserves to stabilize Sven at Village Number 2, then order a phased retreat to preserve the bulk of the army. This might save his forces, but it risked a collapse during the retreat if Carnford pursued, and the blow to his prestige and morale would be immeasurable. Time ticked away. The Carnford squares drew closer, and Sven's next messenger could bring news of total collapse at any moment. Harold scanned the faces of his generals, then looked at the distant Carnford banner. Pride, desperation, and the fear of his tribe's extinction warred within him. No, I am the White Wolf King, destined to conquer the northern frontier. I will not retreat here. The center route is the key to victory. Sven must fend for himself. Harold made a ruthless decision. He turned sharply and commanded with gravelly authority, pointing to a silent, imposing general. Joel. Present. Joel stepped forward. Though not tall, he was lean and sharp-eyed. Commander of the Musketeer Guard, Solan's last reserve. Do you see that blue tide? Harold roared, pointing to the center route. The Carnford people want my life. I am entrusting you with Solan's sharpest blade. Harold locked eyes with him. Take your Musketeer Guard and all remaining reserves. Don't just block them, drive them back. Crush the Carnford center. You have one chance, Harold added, his voice dripping with icy intent. Succeed, and you are Solan's greatest hero. Fail. Harold left the threat unspoken, his bloodshot eyes conveying the lethal consequence. Joel struck his chest firmly. Your Majesty, have no fear. As long as the Musketeer Guard stands, the center holds. I will grind the Carnford center into dust. Joel turned and barked orders. Musketeer Guard, assemble. Target, the Carnford center, advance. The Musketeer Guard, clad in iron-reinforced cotton armor and armed with the finest matchlock muskets, moved out like a wall of steel, marching against the Carnford advance. On the central plains, wind whipped smoke and snow across the battlefield. The 2nd Battalion's 4 infantry companies advanced like deep blue streams, their heavy boots thudding against the frozen earth like war drums. Peter felt the flintlock musket strap digging into his shoulder, the cold metal banging against his leg. He gasped for air, his breath turning to white mist. Exhaustion had replaced his initial fervor. The air was filled with the sounds of heavy breathing, clattering gear, and the distant, rhythmic thunder of cannons and musket volleys. These sounds from the flanks served as a grim reminder that death was near. The air reeked of acrid gunpowder and the metallic, sickening scent of blood, the chilling breath of the battlefield. Every breath felt like inhaling the cold, stagnant scent of death. Heavy wooden carriages dragged 4 8-pound bronze field guns behind the infantry. The gunners ran alongside the silent, black-muzzled beasts, their faces taut with tension. Toot-de-toot. The sharp, intermittent bugle calls cut through the noise. Silence fell over the ranks, leaving only the sound of heavy breathing and pounding hearts. Everyone stared ahead, eyes scanning for threats. The 2nd Battalion bypassed the 7th Battalion's line, giving Peter a harrowing glimpse of the front. Glancing left, Peter saw the hellscape less than 100 paces away. Kill. Hold the line. Bayonets. Deafening roars, screams of the dying, and the sharp pop-pop of musket fire assaulted his ears. Thick white smoke rose as spears leveled and thrust, withdrawing stained with fresh blood. The ground, once snow-covered, was now a chaotic mess of red and black. Corpses of men and horses lay in twisted, layered heaps. Wounded horses thrashed in the mud, their desperate cries piercing the air. Broken banners, shattered spears, and dented armor littered the field like refuse. Dark, viscous blood pooled on the ground, churned into a slippery, freezing sludge by countless boots. Medics worked frantically under fire, trying to bandage the wounded. The agonizing screams of the injured were enough to chill the bravest soul. Peter felt his stomach churn, his throat parched. The patriotic fervor he felt that morning withered in the face of such raw carnage. Fear coiled around his heart. He forced his eyes back to the back of the comrade in front of him. The battalion moved quickly, avoiding the worst of the sight. A signal changed the pace. Company, slow down. Combat positions. Peter halted on a flat, trampled patch of ground. He breathed deeply, trying to calm his racing heart. His palms were slick with sweat, then chilled by the wind. He practiced his breathing exercises, trying to suppress the trembling in his limbs. A long, clear stop, bugle call pierced the din. Company, attention, the captain roared. Yes, the soldiers shouted in unison, their training overriding their fear. The captain, sword drawn, scanned his men. Company, left turn. With a sharp, synchronized movement, Peter pivoted into position. The full view of the front finally opened before him. About 200 paces down a gentle slope, a wall of Solonian soldiers stood amidst the lingering mist and smoke. They were scrambling to organize their formation, officers shouting and waving weapons. Ahead of their line, several bronze cannons were scattered, their positions uncoordinated and their crews still struggling to prepare them. Above the enemy ranks, banners bearing beast totems whipped violently in the cold wind. Peter couldn't identify the specific emblems of the enemy banners, but he knew they were foes who had to be destroyed. The company commander roared, "Listen up. These savages are different. They have muskets and cannons." He pointed toward the scattered enemy artillery and the dense ranks of musketeers. "They may be crude, but their lead balls kill just the same. One hit means death or a grievous wound." He glared at his men. "Stay sharp. Don't hesitate to hit the dirt or charge. Follow my orders. If anyone fails their brothers, I'll execute them myself." "Understood. Understood." The company roared back, their morale bolstered as the commander's bluntness cut through their anxiety. A signal sounded. The commander pointed his blade at the chaotic Solon lines and bellowed, "All troops, advance." Peter, clutching his flintlock musket, moved forward with the second company. He felt the heavy breathing of his comrades, while his own heart raced like a wild horse. His palms grew slick with cold sweat, and his throat felt parched, as if filled with sand. He had imagined the battlefield countless times before. In his dreams, he was a hero, charging into battle with precise shots and a sharp bayonet to earn glory. But reality was different. The enemy was a wall of malice. The air reeked of gunpowder and blood, and the sounds of war were deafening. His body betrayed him. His hands stiffened and his legs trembled with primal fear. He tried to focus on his training, but his muscles betrayed his inner turmoil. "Stay steady," he whispered to himself, looking at the determined faces of his brothers in arms. They were a single, unbreakable wall. Boom, 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 boom. A thunderous roar erupted from behind them as the ground shook. Their field cannons had fired, sending iron balls screaming over their heads toward the ruined village held by the Solon soldiers. The destruction momentarily distracted Peter from his fear. The Solonians returned fire. Their shots landed short, kicking up mud and snow without causing casualties. At this range, such artillery was mostly for intimidation. Yet, as they marched forward, the shadow of death loomed closer. Whiz boom! An enemy shell struck the neighboring company 20 paces ahead. Splat, crack! My leg! Medic! The sound of shattering bone and agonizing screams filled the air as the shell tore through the ranks, leaving blood and limbs scattered. The stench of blood pierced Peter's heart like an icicle. His heart skipped a beat, then hammered violently, his vision blurred with terror. Just as he neared collapse, he saw a familiar, steady figure ahead. It was Company Commander Weber. Weber stood tall, hand on his saber, moving with unwavering resolve. He said nothing, but his silent strength was more powerful than any speech. Seeing Weber, Peter felt his nerves settle. He remembered the commander's hidden kindness and resilience. With his brothers and commander present, the fear began to recede. Tweet, 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 tweet. A sharp, piercing whistle cut through the battlefield noise. "Company, attention!" Weber roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. Shoulder arms. With a metallic clatter, Peter and his comrades shifted their muskets. First rank, present arms. "Huh!" Peter and the first rank shouted, snapping into position with their bayonets pointed toward the sky. Second and third ranks, shoulder arms. The rear ranks adjusted their weapons, ready to support. Instantly, the second company became a forest of gleaming bayonets. The cold steel reflected the dim light, a manifestation of their iron will. Boom, 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 boom. The drummers struck a rapid, rhythmic beat that echoed like the drums of war. A fife joined in, playing a sharp, stirring march that blended with the drums. Caught in the rhythm, Peter began to march in perfect step with his comrades. Charge! Weber swung his saber. Kill! The company roared. Boom, 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 boom. The entire 2nd Battalion marched in unison, hundreds of boots striking the frozen earth to the deafening rhythm of drums and flutes. Their steady, thunderous advance pressed forward, an unstoppable force bearing down on the Solon defense line 200 paces away. As the forest of bayonets swayed like waves, Peter felt his initial terror transform into a burning, resolute numbness, shared by the rhythmic breathing of his comrades. He kept his eyes locked on the enemy, watching the black-clad figures scramble to prepare for the onslaught. In stark contrast to the disciplined Carnford advance, the Solon Center was a scene of chaotic, violent despair. "Stand your ground, you wretched slaves. Do you want to die?" A commander roared in fury. Thomas looked up, his eyes dull and vacant. Einar was lashing a young slave who had become separated from his unit during the earlier bombardment and was now frantically searching for cover. "My lord, I can't find," the slave cried. "Useless trash." Einar, losing patience, decided to use the boy to terrify the wavering cannon fodder. He drew his saber and swung it in a lightning-fast arc squelch. The boy's head was severed before he could finish his scream, his body collapsing in a pool of blood. The surrounding slaves gasped in horror, their faces pale. This cold-blooded execution felt more immediate and threatening than the distant Carnford cannons. Thomas remained in a state of catatonic numbness, his soul seemingly detached from the carnage. Only when the hot, metallic-smelling blood splattered onto his face and the dull thud of the corpse hit the ground did a flicker of consciousness return to his deadened eyes. Einar wiped his blade, his face twisted in a mix of cruelty and hysterical anxiety. "Did you see that? Desertion means death. Retreat means death." He gestured toward the approaching Carnford line, spewing propaganda. "Those Carnford devils are here to steal your food, burn your homes, and slaughter your families. You have no way out. If you don't kill them, they will kill you all. But if you follow me and Con Harold to break their line, the Plantagenet kingdom's wealth, their grain, silver, and women, will all be yours. Don't fear their muskets and cannons. We have them too. Fight for your lives, follow me, and kill." Thomas felt no inspiration. After the initial shock, his heart turned colder than the northern frontier wind. He watched Einar with a gaze that slowly shifted from the blood-stained saber to the brutal Solon officers behind him. Survive? Seize everything. He thought of his unborn child and his wife, who died in childbirth. He remembered his tent, stripped of all men by Solon's three-man conscription policy, leaving only wailing widows and orphans. He saw his comrades treated like disposable trash, their lives discarded in this endless cycle of misery. It wasn't the Carnford people who had destroyed his life, but Harold, Solon, and the very man shouting before him. He had never seen a Carnford soldier loot his village. He had only ever seen Solon nobles and officers slaughtering his people and crushing his tribe. Woo! A piercing bugle call sounded from the Carnford line, and the blue wall of bayonets accelerated toward them. The final battle had begun. Thomas felt no desire to fight for Solon's promised spoils. Einar's words were nothing but poisonous lies. Instead, a deep, Suppressed hatred began to simmer within him like a frozen volcano. He kept his head bowed, but his eyes, now like a wounded wolf, remained fixed on Einar's back. His gaze was no longer fearful. It was cold, pure, and filled with lethal intent. Life had no meaning, but before he died, a dark, desperate plan began to take root. Whoosh boom! A cannonball tore through the air with terrifying speed. Thomas ducked instinctively as the shell slammed into the slave formation 30 paces to his left. Squelch! Crack! 4 or 5 slaves were instantly shredded by the blast. Bloody limbs and debris rained down on Thomas, covering him in warm, metallic-smelling gore. He gagged, coughing as the stench of gunpowder and viscera filled his lungs. The Carnford artillery adjusted its aim, landing shells directly into the dense Solon ranks. Every blast made Thomas's heart hammer against his ribs, and the sound of chattering teeth spread through the terrified ranks. The blue wall of the Carnford army continued its steady, rhythmic advance. The distance closed to 130 paces. The cold glint of their bayonets became suffocatingly clear. His earlier spark of vengeance was extinguished by the primal, overwhelming terror of imminent death. Fear flooded his nerves, his legs trembling as he gripped his worn saber. "I can't die here like trash," Thomas roared internally, his survival instinct overriding his hatred. "I must live. Only then can I avenge Maria and our child." Despite his ignorance of the slim survival odds on this meat-grinder battlefield, a desperate, self-deceiving instinct to live kept Thomas from collapsing. He scanned the slave soldiers in the front row, their faces bloodless as they clutched their matchlock muskets and inferior firearms. He prayed for the order to fire, hoping that once he discharged his weapon, he could retreat to the safer rear ranks. Suddenly, their squad leader stumbled forward, brandishing a dao and screaming, "Hold your fire. Keep your fingers off the triggers. No volley without the horn. Anyone who fires early gets cut down." Thomas's hope vanished. He remained trapped in the front row, watching the blue wall of death march steadily toward them, now only 100 paces away. Bang! Bang bang! Carnford skirmishers broke from the main line, stopping at 70 paces to pick off the chaotic Solon formation with precision fire. My eyes! Help me! Though the shots were sporadic, each crack of a musket resulted in a Solon soldier falling. The casualties mounted faster and more accurately than during the artillery barrage. Thomas saw nearly 10 men near him collapse into the muddy, frozen snow, writhing in agony. They were so close he could smell the fresh blood and see the frozen terror on their faces. This helplessness, being picked off while unable to retaliate, was more nerve-wracking than cannon fire. Thomas's blood ran cold, his scalp tingled, and his grip on his dao turned numb from the strain. Solon sent out fur-clad hunters and archers to suppress the Carnford skirmishers. Their arrows flew, but they lacked the precision and lethality of the Carnford soldiers. The blue wall closed to 80 paces, accompanied by drums and flutes. Thomas could clearly see the Carnford soldiers' cold expressions and their gleaming, triangular bayonets. A shrill Solon horn finally pierced the noise. The squad leader roared, his voice cracking, "Raise muskets! Front rank, raise muskets! Prepare!" The slave soldiers scrambled, shakily leveling their mismatched weapons at the approaching blue line. Thomas numbly raised his rusted dao, knowing it was useless at this range. His heart hammered against his ribs, drowning out everything except the leader's shouts and the rhythmic, approaching footsteps. Thump! 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 The rhythmic drumming, transmitted through the frozen earth, synchronized with Peter's frantic heartbeat. He moved mechanically, following his training, left foot, right foot, marching toward death. The triangular bayonet on his musket caught the pale light, radiating a cold, lethal aura. At 70 paces, Peter saw the details of the enemy, their disorganized clothing, terrified faces, and trembling, poorly trained aim. Carnford officers kicked and shoved their own men to keep the line straight. They're going to fire. A desperate urge to flee surged in Peter, but discipline and the proximity of his comrades held him in place. The drums and flutes continued unabated. The blue formation remained a relentless, unyielding machine, advancing without hesitation. This absolute discipline provided Peter with a twisted sense of security. Just follow the rhythm. don't think. Whoa! A sharp, distinct horn blast from the Solon side signaled the order to fire. It's time. Peter's mind went blank. Bang! Bang bang! Bang! As the horn faded, a wall of orange muzzle flashes erupted from the Solon front. White smoke bloomed like flowers of death, accompanied by a deafening roar that threatened to shatter eardrums, followed by a wave of hot, acrid sulfur. Peter instinctively squeezed his eyes shut, his muscles locking in a paralyzing jolt of electricity. Time stretched as he braced for the impact of lead tearing through his flesh. Thud. Ah, my arm. Medic. Instead of a uniform impact, the line was met with the sickening sounds of lead hitting flesh and bone, followed by agonizing screams. Peter felt his line shudder as if struck by a giant hammer. Dozens of soldiers collapsed or stumbled, dragged back by those behind them. The volley was brief, but its psychological and physical toll was immense. As the echoes faded, leaving only the groans of the wounded and distant artillery, Peter slowly emerged from his paralysis. He peeked through his eyelids to see the front rank still standing, though gaps had appeared in the smoke-filled, muddy snow. He felt no pain. He wiggled his fingers, then his toes, then his limbs. They were intact, and he was still marching. Peter realized with shock that while his mind had frozen in terror, his body, driven by thousands of hours of muscle memory, had never stopped moving. Peter marched forward, his movements mechanical and precise, keeping perfect pace with the rhythmic drums. I'm alive. A surge of relief and absurdity washed over Peter. He suppressed the emotion, gripping his flintlock musket tightly. The cold metal steadied him. He scanned his surroundings. Most comrades were alive, though pale and sweating, as the line continued its advance. To his right, the spot where the recruit Hans should have been was empty. A soldier behind him stumbled forward to fill the gap. Hans was gone. A blurred figure in blue lay on the ground. Peter dared not look closer. Death had arrived with terrifying proximity. Why don't we stop? How much further? A trembling voice nearby whispered in fear. Indeed, why continue after a volley? Were they to march until they could bayonet the enemy? Peter's throat was too dry to answer. Training had taught them to advance, load, and fire, but never how to address the meaning of death under fire. Before he could speak, a shrill sound pierced the air. The Solon line's horn sounded again, signaling another volley. Again, the thought flashed through Peter's mind. Fear swallowed his returning reason. As the Solon line erupted in smoke, Peter and the other recruits squeezed their eyes shut, bracing for death. 20 paces. The Carnford army pressed on. Despite the mounting casualties, the formation held. Bang! Bang bang bang. A chaotic, close-range volley erupted from the Solon line, its accuracy deadly at this distance. Hold the line. Musket fire tore through the front ranks. Lead balls shredded uniforms and flesh, accompanied by the sickening sounds of breaking bones and dying screams. A loud metallic clang rang out near Peter's ear, followed by a familiar, agonizing cry. Splattered with warm, metallic-smelling blood, Peter turned. Mark, his best friend who spoke of returning home to marry his childhood sweetheart, lay face down in the mud. A horrific hole near Mark's left shoulder bled profusely, staining his blue uniform dark red. Mark's body twitched, his fingers clawing the dirt as his eyes, filled with longing and pain, fixed on Peter before glazing over. No, Mark. Peter's heart stopped. He tried to scream, but no sound emerged. Time froze. The battlefield noise faded, leaving only Mark's dying gaze and the spreading pool of blood. Without pause, a comrade shoved Peter aside to fill the gap left by Mark. His friend was left behind on the blood-soaked path. The formation marched on, the drums beating as coldly and rhythmically as before. Pushed by the ranks behind, Peter moved mechanically, not daring to look back. The warm blood on his face burned like a brand, searing his soul. Tears mixed with soot tracked down his cheeks, not from weakness, but from a cold, shattered resolve. He looked up, locking his gaze onto the smoke-filled Solon line. Fear was replaced by a cold, murderous rage. He gripped his musket until his knuckles turned white. Mark's blood would not be shed in vain. 15 paces. Just as Peter thought the march would never end, a long, clear signal pierced the air. The stop horn sounded like a miracle. The battalion drums shifted from a steady march to four sharp, powerful beats. Boom, 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 boom. Company. Captain Weber's voice, raspy yet commanding, roared like thunder. Attention. Bang. Over 100 pairs of heavy boots slammed into the ground in perfect unison, kicking up dust and blood. It stopped. Everything stopped. The relentless marching and the drums ceased instantly. The transition from extreme motion to absolute stillness left only the distant cannons and the wind fluttering the bloody flags. The silence created a suffocating, dramatic tension. The chaotic Solon line was stunned by the sudden change. The blue wall that had marched through death stood still, just 15 paces away, close enough to see the shock on the enemy's faces. The Solon soldiers and slave soldiers froze, staring in confusion and deeper fear at these silent devils. The silence lasted less than 2 heartbeats. Ready? Weber roared with every ounce of his strength. The command echoed across the entire line. Ready? Peter and his comrades shouted in unison, their voices trembling with rage and resolve. With a sharp, synchronized metallic clatter, over 1,000 muskets were raised, angled 45 degrees toward the sky. The soldiers pulled back their hammers in unison, the flint and steel ready to spark at the pull of a trigger. The forest of bayonets overhead seemed to grow taller and more lethal as the angle shifted. The volley was imminent. This signal acted as a death knell, shattering the last remnants of the Solon army's crumbling resolve. Run! They're firing! They're devils! A shrill scream triggered a total collapse. The Solon left flank and center disintegrated like a sandbank hit by a flood. Thousands discarded their gear, howling in despair as they fled. Survival instinct overrode discipline, the execution squads, and even fear of Harold. They trampled one another in a desperate bid to escape. Stand fast. No retreating. Death to deserters. Solon veterans in the execution squad cut down the frontrunners, but the human tide was too overwhelming to stop. The surging crowd swallowed the execution squad, turning their attempts at order into further chaos. Aim! Weber's voice cut through the air like a reaper's decree. Shoo! 1,000 Conford soldiers moved in perfect unison, leveling their flintlock muskets. The dark muzzles stared down the fleeing Solon soldiers, who were exposed just 15 paces away. Peter wiped his eyes, locking his sights onto a Solon soldier struggling to push through the crowd. The soldier fumbled with a ramrod, desperately trying to reload his musket while fleeing. The battlefield seemed enchanted. The wind died, the cannons fell silent, and the screams faded. Everyone, from the fleeing Solon troops and Harold on his platform to the Conford rear guard, was frozen by the sight of the leveled musket line. Time stood still. A deathly silence descended, broken only by ragged breathing and the faint hiss of burning fuses. Conford soldiers held their breath, fingers steady on the triggers. Many Solon soldiers looked back in despair at the wall of silent muzzles. All waited for the final judgment. Fire! Weber's hoarse, murderous command surged through the soldiers' nerves, reaching Peter's resolute mind. Peter exhaled and pulled the trigger with all his might. Click! The flint struck the steel, igniting the flash pan with a hiss, followed instantly by a thunderous boom. Peter felt the violent recoil as his musket spat a blinding flash of orange and white flame, followed by thick, acrid smoke. It was not an isolated event. Every soldier in the front 2 ranks acted as one. Boom, 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 boom. The volley erupted like a continuous, earth-shattering thunderclap. Muzzle flashes bloomed like a wall of fire across the 400-meter line. A massive, dragon-like cloud of white smoke billowed upward. Within seconds, the Conford front was shrouded in a dense, rolling wall of smoke. The smoke wall writhed in the wind, a terrifying white dragon looming over the field. The roar was so deafening that even the distant warhorses panicked, rearing and throwing their riders. Faster and deadlier than the sound were the thousands of lead balls propelled by the gunpowder. The metal storm crossed the 15 paces in a fraction of a second, slamming into the dense Solon ranks. Puff, puff, puff. The sickening sound of lead hitting flesh echoed continuously, followed by a spray of gore. The bullets easily tore through leather and cotton armor. Even iron plating offered no protection at such close range. The projectiles shredded muscle and shattered bone, deforming upon impact to turn internal organs into pulp. Arg! My stomach! Help me! Shrieks and death rattles erupted from the Solan ranks. Soldiers were knocked backward, collapsed like rag dolls, or writhed on the ground in agony. Blood sprayed like fountains, painting the battlefield in dark, visceral red. The front rank of the Solan army was effectively scythed down in a single instant. They fell in rows, silent and lifeless, before they could even scream. Of the 1,000 Solan soldiers facing the volley, over 700 were dead or dying within seconds. The front 2 layers of the Solan line were erased, a sight so horrific it destroyed the survivors' will to fight. Thomas's ears rang with the thunderous echo that seemed to shatter the world. The sound left him with a high-pitched ringing, his head spinning and his vision blurred. He struggled to lift his head. The scene was hellish. Bodies littered the ground, broken limbs and scattered weapons everywhere. The air reeked of gunpowder and fresh blood. How was I still alive? Thomas's mind struggled to process the moment. He recalled the final instant before the volley, the flash of light and the thunderous roar, when survival instinct took over. My legs gave way, and I collapsed. This clumsy fall saved me from the lethal barrage that swept past at head height. Had I remained standing, the thought chilled me. I scrambled to crawl away, accidentally bumping into a figure nearby. Ugh, hhh. A pained, blood-choked groan drew Thomas's attention. Beside me lay a Solan soldier with a gaping, steaming wound in his abdomen, his intestines spilling onto the frozen earth. The soldier writhed in agony, his body arching like a bow as he let out inhuman, piercing screams. His hands, raw and bloody from the pain, clawed frantically at the hard ground, leaving deep red gouges. Nauseated, I carefully avoided the soldier's flailing hands, preparing to flee towards safety. Suddenly, something gripped my ankle tightly. I looked down to see a blood-stained hand clutching my leg. It was the execution squad member. The man who had recently been slaughtering his own comrades now lay pale and dying, his throat bubbling with bloody froth. His eyes, wide with terror and a desperate plea for life, locked onto me. His armor was pierced, dark blood pooling beneath him. The iron plate, which should have been sturdy, had been easily punctured at 15 paces, the deformed lead bullet causing horrific internal damage. Save me. The soldier wheezed, his eyes begging. I looked down at the man who had treated lives like grass, now reduced to a dying dog in the mud. A mix of disgust, grim satisfaction, and profound sorrow surged within me. Without a word, I raised my left foot and, with cold, cathartic force, stomped down on the man's face. Crack! A sharp sound of breaking bone echoed. The execution squad member's head snapped to the side, his neck shattered. The light faded from his eyes, and his grip on my ankle went limp. Freed, I jumped up without a second glance. Just then, bang, 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 bang. Another volley from the Conford lines rang out. Though less thunderous than the first, it dealt a final blow to the already collapsing Solan center. The ranks were in total chaos. Officers and soldiers were scattered, everyone screaming and pushing in a desperate, panicked flight. Behind them, a fierce, martial bugle call pierced the smoke. The Conford army had begun their full-scale pursuit. My heart tightened. Survival instinct took over again. I joined the tide of fleeing soldiers, clutching my flintlock musket, which I had managed to load but not yet fire. The cold weapon was my only anchor to reality as I ran, surrounded by the sounds of heavy breathing and desperate cries. Kill! As the smoke cleared, a roar erupted from the Conford lines. Inspired by the bugle, Weber raised his saber and charged out of the smoke, leading the assault against the retreating enemy. Thousands of Conford infantry, a blue flood, surged forward with fixed bayonets, overwhelming the broken Solan forces. Peter felt a surge of hot blood to his head, all fear and sorrow transformed into a pure, primal desire for slaughter. He ran alongside Weber and his comrades, leaving the smoke and stench of death behind. The wave of pursuit quickly engulfed the Solan stragglers. Bayonets flashed, mercilessly stabbing and hacking at the Solan soldiers who had lost all will to resist. The battlefield was filled with desperate screams and the dull thud of steel entering flesh. The broken slave soldiers, like lambs to the slaughter, offered no resistance, exposing their backs to the bayonets. The Musketeer Guard, once Harold's elite, were now just part of a panicked, disorganized mob fleeing toward the rear. The tide of refugees was so overwhelming that it swept away the Solon execution squad and elite units attempting to hold the line. The squad's shouts and blades were useless against the thousands of desperate men. They were dragged along in the retreat. Even the Solon cavalry, waiting in the rear, were caught in the disaster. The flood of fleeing men shattered the cavalry's formation. Horses panicked, unable to gain the speed necessary for a charge. The pursuing Conford infantry surrounded the trapped cavalry, stabbing at horses and riders alike. Amidst the screams and clashing metal, many Solon cavalrymen were dragged from their mounts and bayoneted in the mud. The Solon army's defeat had devolved into a total, chaotic rout. Peter, lost in a frenzy of pursuit, mechanically and viciously drove his bayonet into every enemy he encountered. I thrust my bayonet repeatedly, losing count of the enemies slain or the distance covered until no foes remained standing around me. Panting, I stood amidst the blood-slicked, metallic-smelling air. I saw Weber's banner advancing, with more blue-clad comrades surging past me in pursuit. "Keep moving. Don't stop," the sergeant urged from behind. Peter wiped the grime from his face, inhaling the cold, gunpowder-scented air. His fear and hesitation had vanished, replaced by a burning adrenaline. He felt a fanatical zeal for victory, a thirst for vengeance for fallen comrades, and a sense of unity within the unstoppable iron tide. He ran again, surrounded by the rhythmic thud of boots and the forest of gleaming bayonets. The Carnford soldiers were unstoppable, driving the enemy into total collapse. "My lord, the center has broken. Harold is finished." Brendan's voice was hoarse and trembling with relief and excitement. He stumbled toward me, pointing at the chaotic, smoke-filled center where the blue wave was sweeping everything away. Having witnessed Carnford's rise, Brendan knew he was now watching an epic victory that would decide the northern frontier's fate. I lowered my telescope, the metal still warm from the heat of the battlefield. I exhaled, releasing years of pressure. I scanned the field. On the left, Otto's flag stood atop the ruins of Village No. 2, with Sven's resistance crumbling. On the right, Duke Schmidt's Franklin army had repelled Asgier's forces, shattering the Solon Bear Legion. In the center, the destruction of the Musketeer Guard had triggered a total collapse of the Solon army. "Order the 7th Battalion and all center units to charge. Press the attack. Give the Solonians no respite," I commanded with iron authority. The messenger galloped off, shouting the orders across the field. I watched through my telescope, my gaze now calm and assessing. The breakthrough in the center meant the collapse of the Solon command structure and morale. Their main force was doomed. Harold's numerical advantage had become a fatal liability. "Victory," I whispered, finally relaxing my white-knuckled grip. "Harold, you have lost." A tide of panicked Solon soldiers surged backward, crushing any attempt to reorganize a defense. The roar of the pursuing Carnford troops mingled with the desperate screams of the routed Solonians. The blue Carnford line expanded like a massive, cold machine, grinding down the remaining Solon resistance. Defensive lines shattered instantly. The blue wave swept the Solonians before it like a flock of sheep. Harold stood motionless beneath the White Wolf royal banner, staring at the apocalyptic scene. His White Wolf elite cavalry had been annihilated by my reserves. His flanks had been exhausted by days of fruitless fighting against Carnford and Franklin. His Musketeer Guard, the backbone of his army, had been crushed by the superior discipline and firepower of the Carnford infantry. Seeing his guard fall, Harold's last hope vanished. He realized that tactics and individual valor were useless against such a vast disparity in national strength and military organization. He had lost not just a battle, but the future of Solon. Thousands of routed soldiers lost their minds, turning into dangerous, frenzied mobs. The oppressed slave soldiers, now unleashed, became violent rioters. "Get out of the way. Horses. Take the horses. Kill the Solonians." In the chaos, soldiers fought each other for mounts, dragging their own cavalrymen from their saddles. Some turned their blades on anyone in their path, comrades, officers, or execution squads. The retreat was a scene of pure slaughter. Authority had evaporated in the face of mass panic. "Your Majesty, flee. We'll be overrun, his remaining guards urged, trying to pull his horse toward the north. Harold stared blankly at the destruction of his life's work. A guard grabbed the reins, attempting to force the horse to turn. Harold gripped the reins tightly, stopping the guard. The king of Solon drew his ceremonial sword, its blade glinting in the dim light. His voice was eerily calm, devoid of anger or fear, as if he had accepted his fate. "Take the remaining men. Follow me in one last charge," Harold commanded. "Target the Carnford musketeers. Hold them back as long as we can." He looked toward the south, toward me, his young rival. "Only this way can more of our people escape." The guards, moved by his tragic resolve, drew their blades. "White Wolf Guard, with me, charge." Reining in his horse, Harold led his remaining elite cavalry in a desperate, suicidal charge against the surging tide of retreating soldiers, heading south toward the encroaching blue line. Harold took one last look at the land he knew, now lost forever. Without a word, he urged his horse forward. The beast, sensing its master's final resolve, galloped toward the advancing blue spruce flag of the new era. Silhouetted against smoke and sunset, his figure appeared lonely yet possessed the final, inviolable dignity of an old-world king. The air was thick with shrieks of despair, curses, dying wails, and the murderous roars of the pursuers. Thomas was swept along by the panicked crowd, running tirelessly like a leaf in a flood. His mind was blank. Fear, hatred, and thought had been drained away by the relentless flight. He ran mechanically, following the flow, until a sudden, thunderous sound of hooves erupted ahead. The rhythmic thumping grew louder, carrying an unstoppable, destructive momentum. Thomas looked up in terror to see Harold's loyal Solon cavalry charging like a whirlwind into the chaotic mob. Disregarding discipline, the riders swung maces, battle axes, and sabers, cutting down everything in their path. Skulls shattered, shoulders split, and throats were slashed as blood sprayed like fountains. The fleeing soldiers shrieked, pushing desperately to escape the slaughter. Jostled by the crowd, Thomas tripped and slammed hard into the mud. Ignoring the pain, he instinctively curled into a ball, shielding his vitals, a survival habit honed on the battlefield. It was the most humble yet effective way to stay alive. Iron hooves thundered past, shaking the earth. Thomas felt feet and hooves trampling his body, but he remained motionless, like a corpse. Eventually, the trampling faded, replaced by the sounds of the Solon cavalry clashing with Carnford infantry nearby, the battle moving steadily southward. Dazed and ringing with tinnitus, Thomas cautiously sat up, gasping for the cold, sobering air. He was covered in mud and blood, but uninjured. He still gripped his flintlock musket tightly. Using the blood-stained stock as a crutch, he shakily stood up. He paused to catch his breath, preparing to find a way out of this death trap. Nearby, another bloodied figure struggled to rise, limping and leaning heavily on a sword. Thomas tightened his grip on the musket, watching warily. The man looked up, revealing a familiar, grime-streaked face. Recognition struck Thomas like a bolt of ice and volcanic rage. He stopped, staring at the man with chilling certainty. "Einar, I've found you." Einar, also bloodied and battered, recognized Thomas. He leaned on his notched sword, his leather armor in tatters. A flicker of panic crossed Einar's eyes, quickly replaced by his habitual arrogance toward slaves. He gestured commandingly. "Thomas, it's you. Help me up. We need to get out of here." Thomas didn't move, staring at Einar as if he were already a corpse. He slowly raised his flintlock, aiming the dark muzzle steadily at Einar. Einar's face paled, his voice turning shrill. "What are you doing?" "I'm Einar, your captain. Put that down." Breathing heavily with hatred, Thomas locked eyes with him. "You killed my wife, my child. I'm here for revenge." Einar scoffed. "You idiot. Your wife died in childbirth. You ungrateful slave. I saved you in Tal Valley. I fed you. I should have killed you back then." The insult acted like a spark in a powder keg, detonating years of suppressed hatred within Thomas. "You killed them. You killed everyone. My parents, my village, my wife, my son. All of you." Thomas screamed, his eyes bloodshot. The floodgates of memory burst open, washing away the survival-driven numbness. "In the northern frontier, your Solonians slaughtered my village. You nailed my father to a door. You ravaged my pregnant wife. You worked my 6-year-old son to death in the mines. Each accusation fueled his burning hatred. These were the scars he had buried while living as a naturalized Solonian, blinded by fear and false glory. Now, with Solon's defeat, the mask was torn away and the wounds were laid bare. Thomas finally realized he was never a Solonian. He was a Plantagenet, a victim of Solonian slavery and slaughter. Their glory was built on the bones of his people. You've lost, Thomas roared, a sense of liberation washing over him. The Carnford people have crushed you. You're nothing but dogs. You're all going to die here. He laughed, tears streaming through the blood on his face. I'm not afraid anymore. Today, I'll kill a Solonian dog for my family. Enraged, Einar forgot his injury and fear, lunging at Thomas with his sword like a cornered beast. But he was no longer facing the submissive, broken slave from Tal Valley. Thomas stood firm, the musket's muzzle locked onto Einar's distorted face, his finger resting on the trigger. Boom! A deafening shot rang out. A cloud of orange flame and smoke erupted as Einar's charge was halted by an invisible force. Einar froze, his expression caught between rage and shock, as he looked down at the dark, spreading stain on his chest before meeting Thomas's eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a wheezing, hollow rattle emerged.